Good morning and welcome to the 10th meeting in 2025 of the Finance and Public Administration Committee. We have received apologies this morning from Ross Greer. The first item on our agenda today is an evidence session with John Paul Marks, Permanent Secretary to the Scottish Government, on issues relating to public administration in government. Mr Marks is joined by Scottish Government officials, Leslie Fraser, Director General Corporate, Gregor Irwin, Director General Economy, and Jackie McAllister, Chief Financial Officer. I welcome you all to the meeting and invite Mr Marks to make a short opening statement. Mr Marks.
Good morning, Convener. Good morning to the committee. We welcome the opportunity to consider public administration, financial management and reform. Firstly, just on the latest, the current and the future Scottish Government budgets, the latest consolidated accounts for 23-24 received an unqualified audit opinion. The Scottish Government will balance the 24-25 budget and happy to confirm zero drawdown of ScotWind in year. And of course, as you know, Budget 25-26 has passed Parliament, setting the spending authority for the final year of this Parliament. The track record of the Scottish Government balancing the budget is good, but fiscal sustainability risks remain high. To respond to that, ministers have confirmed that the MTFS will be published in May, with a fiscal sustainability delivery plan, setting out future plans that the government has on workforce, health and social care reform, social security, tax and growth. The UK spending review, of course, is due in June, and the Scottish Government, once it's received revised capital assumptions for future years, will publish its infrastructure plan. This should mean all those artefacts are available for parliamentary scrutiny to inform Budget 26-27. The Government will also provide a further update on its public service reform programme, including a renewed vision and revised governance. This will include delivering more cashable benefits from programmes including estates, digital, commercial and workforce programmes, and continuing to take steps to empower systems to innovate, raise revenue and recover costs. A set of programmes transforming public services through digital, including cloud identity payments and shared services. Continuing with a mission to improve services across systems, for example, summary case management is rolling out in the justice system, delivering programmes such as the Promise and Whole Family Support, which have been informed by Pathfinder evaluations, which will publish this year, and will also be publishing more detailed plans on health and social care innovation and operational improvement. Finally, investing in prevention, building on that legacy of public health reform in Scotland, such as with initiatives such as minimum unit pricing, bringing forward further opportunities to make progress, including legislating for a tobacco-free generation. No doubt we'll touch today on the historic harassment reviews. We've done a lot of work over the years to continue to develop our propriety and ethics capabilities in the Scottish Government, with published procedures and a recently updated Scottish Ministerial Code. And we're continuing to develop public administration capabilities, for example, on transparency. We strengthened the performance report within the annual report and accounts. Jackie's led the work developing public sector financial reporting. We reset and have improved freedom of information response rates to Parliament and the public, and a transparency review, which Gregor is leading on our commercial assets, will shortly conclude. On approach and structures, we've completed our governance review and agreed a revised fiscal framework with the Treasury, as you're aware, and we reset the relationship with the new UK government following the UK general election. Finally, to support delivery, we developed our strategy performance and delivery unit. We have a set of targeted programmes to improve risk management and accountable officer assurance, a new Cabinet Office dashboard to support delivery, to track the PFG deliverables and provide that assurance to Cabinet, with a review on the National Performance Framework underway. All of that is underpinned by our Scottish Government leadership framework and our commitment to civil service values and in the service of Scotland values as well. Finally, I'm grateful to the team and to our partners for their leadership, their resilience and their hard work. I wish colleagues and the committee very well for the future, and we look forward to your questions.
Thank you very much. More finalies in there than a set of questions from Craig Hoy, I noticed. Well, good morning, and I'll just, it seems almost yesterday since you just arrived, actually. I can't believe, actually, how fast the time has actually gone. And in that relatively short period of time, I just wonder if you could tell us what you feel your main achievements as Permanent Secretary have been, and what areas do you feel you could and should have perhaps done better?
So if I look back, this is, I'm into my 4th year in the role. If I think back to 2022 and sort of, I've served 3 First Ministers in my time as Permanent Secretary. The work with Ms Sturgeon and the team to ensure that we came out of the Omicron peak and then moved through that summer period, settling industrial action, and making sure, for example, we balanced the budget but could expand the Scottish Child payments to under 16. So that period was significantly disrupted, of course, by what was still living through the pandemic, but then also other events such as war in Ukraine and then the standing up of our own resettlement programme in Scotland, including the procurement of 2 cruise ships for over 3,000 refugees. So if I look back on 2022, there's a lot to be proud of, and I'm really grateful to the team. One of the highlights, although of course it was a very sombre and sad time, was the delivery of Operation Unicorn. It was a privilege to work with the Royal Household and honour the late Queen and deliver that programme in Scotland with the Lord Lion, and always reflect on that. If I think through the time working for and serving Humza Yousaf, we got the Verity House Agreement in place. I hope that will be an enduring commitment to partnership between devolved and local governments, and there's been moments where that's been under strain, but lots of moments to be proud of where we've made progress as well. And then, of course, most recently with Mr Swinney, we've reset the programme for government around his 4 priorities. We continue to take steps to try and bear down on child poverty, grow the economy, improve public services and make progress to net zero. So there have been a set of shocks through my time as Perm Sec, coming out of that pandemic, double-digit inflation, war in Europe, and a set of reshuffles all to handle. But I think we've done it seeking to improve the core capability of the Scottish Government at the same time and make progress on delivering and serving the government of the day. Things I would like to have done differently. Well, I was at the PAC just recently saying, should we have been more radical on public service reform? We've made good progress on our digital programmes, on workforce, on commercial, but there's no doubt that fiscal sustainability remains a risk. It's a high risk across all 4 nations. So we need to continue to find the opportunities to accelerate public service reform, to reduce cost and deliver better outcomes for less. So always looking for those opportunities in the future will be important for the team.
Okay, thank you. And what would you think should be the priorities for your successor?
Well, in the end, my priorities, my role is very clearly defined. So the first priority is to serve ministers and serve the government of the day. And, the First Minister has kindly been coming to talk to the senior leadership team of the civil service since he's come back in as First Minister. We reflect on those areas where we are seeing good progress and improving outcomes and operating in a way that is accelerated and activist in the mode that the First Minister wishes, but we also reflect on areas where we want to improve faster. And so that first element, serving the government of the day with impartiality, with integrity, giving ministers the best honest advice that you can.
But surely that's taken as read. I mean, to be honest, that's not really a priority. That's just the nature of the position that you're in. I mean, that's not a priority for government. It's just to serve the government of the day. That's taken as read wherever you would be in the civil service structure, would it not? I mean, if you were Joe Griffin, and I don't want to obviously put words necessarily into your mouth, but you must have, if you had 3 things that you would like, if you had been remaining in post, you would like to see achieved over, for example, the next year or so, what would those be?
Well, so I touched on public service reform, and I think if we are to continue to deliver better outcomes for less cost, we're going to need to continue to find opportunities to transform public services. So if I take, for example, our digital programmes, we've been discussing and developing common platforms and capabilities that can be reused across other public bodies, and Leslie can say a bit more if you're interested in this programme, but making sure that those platforms and services can be reused and accelerated. Ultimately, AI, the opportunity of digital transformation, is going to be a fundamental enabler for public service transformation in the years ahead. So one of the things I will continue to encourage the team to do in my last few weeks, and will be doing in my next role, is nurturing that capability to ensure that we can reap those rewards as best we can. And that translates into real-world outcomes, such as being able to roll out digital dermatology services so people can get diagnostics sooner, in terms of imaging and cancer diagnostics, to, again, reduce cost in the acute system and enable people to get faster public services. But also you look at public bodies like Visit Scotland, who have transformed their operating model to go online, provide digital services for less cost. So ultimately that is going to be one of the key accelerators in the next 5 years. So for Joe and the team, we've been discussing it at ET in the last couple of weeks. That's going to be an important priority.
I mean, we heard from the Public Accounts Committee that there's around £280 million has been saved through reform over the last couple of years, and the proposal is for £300 million over the next couple of years. And you're trying to encourage and support empowerment for cost recovery and revenue raising through examples such as tourism levy and the cruise ship levy. But I'm just wondering if there are what specific areas have you saved money in, and how much has been saved in these areas? Can you give us an example or two, and an example or two where it's likely to be saved in future?
Yeah, so Leslie might have the table. In fact, I can see Leslie has the table in front of her. So maybe if Leslie just steps us through, but it's some of those things I mentioned in my opening statement. We've closed 10 buildings, public sector, workforce control, civil services getting smaller. But Leslie, do you want to just step us through the savings? That'd be great.
Yeah, thanks very much, Permsec. So, the single Scottish estate and the work we've done on our own estate is a really good example of that. So, in the last couple of years, we've probably saved around £6.5 million from closing buildings already. And we reckon that we'll get another £10 million worth of cashable savings and another £17 million worth of cost avoiding savings in the next couple of years, again through our just work on our own estate and closing buildings. What we're doing across the wider public sector, the national collaborative procurement arrangements are probably a really good example of that, and those avoid costs for many public bodies across Scotland, from health boards through local authorities, and indeed out into some of the third sector as well, who provide public services. So as a tangible example, in the last financial year, we saved over £37 million worth on energy bills alone for the public sector in Scotland by doing that sort of once for Scotland approach. We're also providing capability in intelligent automation, for example. So we have a centre of expertise within my teams, and they work both within Scottish Government but also with public bodies. One of the biggest examples at the moment is probably the work they're doing with the Scottish Public Pensions Agency, who are implementing the MacLeod remedy, which members may be familiar with. And that is a huge enterprise requiring 60,000 pensions to be re-evaluated, which is, I think, 5 times more than the Pensions Agency would do in a normal year. So again, much of that can be automated, and the Pensions Agency think that they'll save probably around 140 members of staff on that enterprise alone by using automation where that's appropriate, obviously with the right checks and balances wrapped around it. But that perhaps gives you a flavour of some of the areas where both once for Scotland approaches, but having centres of expertise can then be deployed time and time again across other public bodies. And I think improving services as well as reducing costs.
Okay, and what about the civil service itself? Because we've been advised through the latest public sector employment statistics, it says in 1999 the number of devolved public sector jobs increased by 16%, but total jobs in the civil service by 96%. And indeed, since Q3 2019, the number of civil service jobs increased by 40%, and there have been the number of senior grade civil service has increased by 500. I mean, what are all these people actually doing, and why has there been such a rapid growth relative to, for example, frontline services? And how much is it costing?
Well, I think over that period, you're describing the creation of devolved government and devolved services. So if I take something like Social Security Scotland, over the last few years, the devolution of Social Security benefits has meant the standing up of that agency and that public body post the Smith Commission. And as you say, that has been a movement of capacity from the UK government to the Scottish government. In terms of the core Scottish government, there has been a reduction in the total number of the workforce, and we have been trying to do that year on year since I've been PermSec. We've done a lot of insourcing of contingent workforce, so the overall has come down, but we expect that to continue, and ministers will set out more of their objectives with regards to workforce in the Public Service Reform publication in the spring and in the Fiscal Sustainability Plan. But if we look back at the size of the public sector in Scotland to 1999, I've got the chart in front of me here. There have been moments in the past where the public sector has been of a similar size, but things like the reduction in registered social landlords transferring out to the private sector, but then similarly the transfer of train operating companies into the public sector. So there's been some pretty strategic structural changes in the way in which the boundary is drawn. But as I said, in terms of public service reform, digital transformation, my expectation, and you can see this in the data, that local government, for example, latest data got marginally smaller. That was true across police and fire and further education. Some of the additional capacity that's gone into, for example, the NHS and the court system has been to try and drive down COVID-related backlogs. Summary case management I referred to earlier, once rolled out and successful, if we can continue to see that backlog come down in the justice system and cleared out, again, there'll be opportunities there for workforce savings. So this is monitored carefully. Mr McKee receives regular advice with regards to the size of the public sector and workforce control. I expect the core civil service will continue to get smaller, but we're doing it as carefully as we can whilst delivering ministers' priorities at the same time.
So if we strip out, for example, areas you've touched on, such as Social Security Scotland and ScotRail, would the civil service workforce have increased or decreased over the last 5 years?
So I've got the data here back to total headcount back to 2022. So if I take the last 4 years, it's come down 0.4% in 23, down 3.4% in 24, and latest published data down 2.7%. So we're expecting to finish 24-25 down approximately 3%, and that's total headcount across directly employed and contingent, so overall. And my expectation is that will continue in terms of a reduction. But as I say, if you then include things like the Crown Office and the Courts Service, there has been some additional capacity made available to try and reduce COVID-related backlogs. But yeah, that's the civil service data that I've got.
I mean, one of the things you talked about is about the decision-making, accountability and delivery of outcomes is went to a dashboard rather than a system of mandate letters, which was the kind of what the previous First Minister was keen on. I'm just wondering how that supports transparency and what the advantages of this new approach is.
So the intent around mandate letters, as you say, was to be very, very clear about, what the intent of the deliverables were at the beginning of the year, and then in our annual report and accounts, we could then show the audit against that and provide that confidence. So over the last, I think, 3 years now, we've done the performance report. So we'll do that again with the latest accounts. The dashboard is a sort of improvement on that process, whereby the Cabinet now meets with the executive team every other month and reviews delivery of the deliverables in the PFG. So there's over 100 activities funded through the budget, set out to Parliament in that PFG. And for each one, we ask accountable officers like Gregor to assure us that they're funded, on track, got an owner, got a milestone, and we're clear ultimately, of course, on the impact that will achieve. And we share that with the First Minister and with the Cabinet. And it allows us to then see if there are structural issues, which mean things that are not progressing as they need to, or it just might be a particular programme where the team are struggling with capacity or funding or the legislative competence or whatever. So it's transparent for Cabinet in terms of, are we on track to deliver the PFG? And we're really committed to thinking about how we can put more of that information into our annual report and accounts. So at year end, you can reconcile. At the beginning of the year, you said you were going to do X and Y and Z. At the end of the year, did you? And did you get the impact you wanted as a result? Because, of course, the PFG is developed by policy teams based on evidence. So I hope this will be improving the delivery capability of the government.
I mean, I think what you say is really important if it's enacted, because one of the key issues for this committee and one of the great frustrations has been that everything always seems to take much longer than we're initially advised. So, for example, in December 2023, we saw the capital infrastructure pipeline. We were then told it would be delayed to the summer, then it was going to be the autumn, blah, 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 blah. It's now going to be September of this year, which is like a 21-month delay. MTFS, of course, didn't happen. We were told because of the general election. It's now going to be this summer, etc. It seems that nothing ever seems to happen on time or when it's originally advised. And there doesn't seem to be any specific deadlines. It's always June or September or whatever. It's never really anything particularly tangible. And this causes real frustration as weeks run into months, which run into years. I mean, is there any... is there going to be more emphasis on pinning down these kind of documents? Because it seems that it's derailed by almost anything that happens at Westminster, whether it's a budget, election, etc. I mean, we realise these things are important, but it's almost as if, well, we've got an election coming, so we'll just not actually deliver this. And it does cause great difficulty in terms of scrutiny. Yeah, so I think the First Minister shared that frustration last summer. Trying to make sure I get my years right. So last summer, having come back into government as First Minister, he was all set to publish Green Industrial Strategy, Programme for Governments, MTFS, and a set of other artefacts. It was my view that he could not publish those documents, and I provided that advice to him. My view was that it was going to influence or could risk influencing the general election and was contrary to the pre-election guidance and therefore the wrong thing to do. That advice ultimately was agreed by the Cabinet and published. So I agree there was that disruption last summer, but I think for the Scottish Government to be, for example, publishing a new programme for government in an election campaign is not appropriate. But your point then of, right, the plan for the year, give us precise dates. I think Ms Robertson has set out precisely her intentions with regards the medium-term fiscal strategy and the sustainability plan. But if we can get any further certainty for the committee on exact dates, then I'm happy to do so. And why are those in two documents? Why is one document? Why is it not one document? Why is fiscal sustainability not in the medium-term financial strategy?
Yeah. So I think they'll be published together. The challenge that we're trying to respond to is MTFS tends to be pretty strategic and show some long-term forecasts derived from assumptions from SFC, OBR and budget. So it's important, but not necessarily sufficient to provide confidence on the actions that will need to be taken to live sustainably within the funding envelope. So the intent of the delivery plan is to sit alongside MTFS. So you're not just looking at a set of forecast scenarios and seeing a long-run deficit and having a debate about that. You're also seeing what the government's strategy is to ensure it remains within balance. I'm confident latest accounts balance the books. I'm confident the budget that has just been passed by Parliament will be balanced again. But the long term, as the SFC and Audit Scotland and others have set out, there are a set of pressures and challenges which all four nations are facing. The government will seek to set out in May what it's going to do about those.
Okay, thank you. Now, the committee recommended that consideration be given to civil servants working for the Scottish Government, providing long-term insight briefings on the challenges facing Scotland over the next 50 years.
Yeah.
And in response to our decision-making report of 2023, you highlighted horizon scanning work already been undertaken on this, and you said that you would begin publishing reports on longer-term insights in the early autumn of 2024 to create a new resource for public bodies and partners for the third and private sector. But it's unclear, actually, whether that has actually happened.
We caught up with the Horizon Scanning team yesterday, so we have established that capability in the strategy and delivery unit, and they are working on a set of technical briefings which are going to be published. Maybe I can write to the committee with precise times, your point on milestones, so we can give you that certainty. But we're really determined that that should be published and that longer term view taken to give you the best evidence we have of things like population trends, demographic shifts, ageing population, dependency on NHS, health and social care, and how that analysis is then informing short-term policy decisions, but also longer-term strategy development. Happy to provide the committee with the timeframes on that. My understanding from the team yesterday, I think, is they're planning on those publications ahead of summer recess.
There's a bit of difference between summer recess 2025 and autumn 2024. I mean, that's nearly a year. I mean, so in 2023 it was going to be next year, and it's actually going 2 years later. This is one of the things that concerns the committee. This relentless slippage that we have. It's never, we never actually get told, oh, we said it was going to be June, but you know what? We're actually going to publish it in May. It's always the other way. It's always months and months and sometimes years behind schedule. Do you not think that's a bit of a failing, actually, really, to be honest? We've only got a 5-year Parliament, so if you've got a 1-year delay, that's 20% of the entire Parliament. It's quite significant. Yeah. And if these are important, and you're suggesting that they are, why has there been this delay of almost a year?
I'll have to go and have a look at exactly where the Horizon team got to and, the time frame for those publications. As I said, I think the last time we had this conversation, we had a different ministerial team. So one of the things, of course, we continue to do is make sure we serve the latest government. So we have reset our PFG, our budget. There's been a set of changes. But let me check to see where the Horizon team got to last autumn, to what extent any of that analysis fed into the budget process in terms of that publication. But I take your point. The last message was publication end of 24. It is more likely to be Q2 25. So that delay is frustrating. I apologise for that.
Yeah, I mean, the ministerial team has not changed that much, to be honest. I mean, I think John Swinney's ministerial team is much the same as Hamza Yousaf's, to be perfectly honest with you. I think milestones are really important, actually, and I think in terms of public reform, one of the things, again, we've tried to ascertain, we've said 300 million over 2 years, but it'd be great if we had milestones within that 2 years, so that it's not just suddenly the big bang, 2 years, and it's 2 years from when exactly? Is it 2 years from the 1st of January? Is it 2 years from the 1st of April?
The PSR benefits are financial years.
I thought they would be, but I mean, it's good if these things are pinned down and it's explained, because that's a fairly simple, straightforward explanation. But it's good if you get milestones so that after 1 quarter, this is where we expect to be, or 6 months or 9 months, and that way, in terms of transparency, we've got a clearer picture of whether the government is actually on track and how much it's saving. Yeah. I just want to ask you one more question, because obviously I've got colleagues who are keen to come in, and that's just on financial memorandum, and I think it's important that progress has been made in terms of financial memorandums. There's been a number of concerns that committees had, actually, for example, about financial memorandums being presented to us, and they've been frankly considerably out of date, and that's obviously had significant implications in terms of the costings and ultimately the scrutiny. But I'm just wondering, we've had a number of members' bills come to us as well, and I'm just wondering if the kind of change in guidance, because what you've said is that the Scottish Government should proactively write to committee as soon as it becomes wary of any significant revised figures, including margins on uncertainty or FMs during stage 1 of a bill's passage. And I'm just wondering if that will apply to members' bills as well as government bills.
I think if that's the committee's preference, and let me just check with the parliamentary legislative team in terms of precise process, but I think if there's a members' bill that the committee wants assurance on with regards our analysis on cost benefit, and we're able to provide it, then happy to look at that. But I would just need to double check what the existing protocol is, and if that's a change, whether ministers are content with that. But,
it just seems it would be more consistent. So, for example, Douglas Ross came last week and he accepted that his financial memorandum on his right to rehab bill needed updated, and he said he would come back to us with an updated financial memorandum. But I think it would be good if that was de rigueur, and that it was expected that any financial memorandum where there was significant change would be updated and perhaps brought back to committee.
Yeah, I mean, I think generally as a principle, we want Parliament to have the best information possible on the costs and benefits of all legislation, whether that be government or private members. But I don't, Jackie, is there anything else you want to add on the process with regards to that at the minute?
We can certainly look into it. I mean, what I would say is that the guidance that's published as part of the SPFM, that applies to Scottish Government bills and Scottish Government administration, but that doesn't mean, as the Permanent Secretary has outlined, that we can't look at how that could be expended, but we need to take it away and I think come back to the committee on that. Okay,
thank you for that. Now, first colleague to ask questions will be Liz, to be followed by Michelle.
Good morning, Permanent Secretary. I wonder if I could ask you about what we as a committee consider to be a very important issue, and that follows on from your appearance the last time. And that's about the public sector reform. And when it comes to the need for public sector reform, which we're all agreed on, one of the most important things is the size of the public sector and how that's playing out in a Scottish Government budget. But the other part of that, as we've been discussing through the convener this morning, is about the headcount within the core civil service. And on that point, I wonder, when it comes to determining what the size is of that core civil service, is that a decision that the First Minister makes, or you as Permanent Secretary makes, or is it a minister? Who decides on that? Because I think last time we were left a little bit in the dark about that.
So ultimately, in terms of the headcount strategy or plan for the core civil service, the team meet with Mr McKee on a regular basis, multiple times a month, to discuss our workforce controls, our latest numbers and our next steps. First Minister and I discuss the strategy. So, for example, he has appointed Mr McKee in that Minister for Public Finance role and is very happy with the way in which that level of engagement is happening between the civil service and ministers to ensure that the control framework that we are putting in place to reduce the size of the civil service is as ministers wish. It is not a total freeze on recruitment, but we are only recruiting by exception, having exhausted all other options first. And as I say, we are, given attrition, getting smaller month on month.
So just to be absolutely clear, Permanent Secretary, that's helpful. Mr McKee's given the committee a good outline of this as well. Who is the final decider when it comes to the number of people in the core civil service? Is that Mr McKee as a minister? Is that you as Permanent Secretary, or is that the First Minister?
Well, I do think it is a dialogue and an agreement between us. So at the moment, the First Minister is clear what the strategy is. Mr McKee and my team, we are working regularly and constantly on the precise number. In the spirit of honesty, we do not have an exact, for example, target for the year end of what the number should be, because we don't have total control on things like leavers and attrition and the like. So what we're trying to do is at every single opportunity optimise the size of the civil service. So if we can have someone leave and not replace them, we won't. And we will try to continually reduce the size. So when I first arrived, I was presented with a workforce plan that would see the Scottish Government have increased by 2,000 headcounts. In the first year, I said, well, we're not doing that. And we stayed broadly flat with some insourcing. And then we accelerated that, and we've come down every year. I mean, I think ultimately I am accountable for the civil service headcount and the workforce, but I'm accountable to ministers. And I see the First Minister every Tuesday morning, and my team meet Mr McKee very regularly. And so I think we are moving through a discipline that is new under devolution. And basically, the workforce went up and up, as the convener you were describing. And since I've been Permanent Secretary, I think this is the first time ever under devolution the workforce overall of the core civil service has got smaller each year. But we're doing it as a dialogue, week on week, month on month, recognising that we might get some massive spike in activity again where we do need to bring capacity in, but that's not our plan. And of course, sorry, the final point is we're trying to do it aligned with our TOC budget.
So when you made the decision that you weren't going to progress with the 2,000 that you were talking about,
yeah.
On what criteria did you make that judgment? Was that something you decided, or was that something that was open to discussion between the First Minister, yourself and Mr McKee?
So back in 2022, it was open to discussion, and that was with, at that stage, Miss Sturgeon, but more to the point, Mr Swinney, who would, as Deputy First Minister at that time, as Miss Robertson takes the sort of finance role now, one of the clear asks of me was to establish more financial control within the core Scottish Government. And we have stepped through, Jackie and I and others, a set of programmes on financial control, AO assurance, workforce management and planning. And these are core capabilities that didn't exist before then in the same level of consistency that they do now.
So we could add that to one of the successes in your term of office, given that the convener asked you earlier about what you saw as achievement.
I mean, it's not massively popular, so I don't know how. Well, it depends who you ask, I suppose. But no, I mean, it's important. Every pound matters, and the thing that we have worked really hard on, and we've balanced the budget despite double-digit inflation and all the challenges, to try and coach that culture. And workforce control is fundamental. Coming from Job Centre Plus, workforce control is just a fundamental business as usual competence. I don't want to. I think we have established that.
No, that's helpful. You'll understand why I'm asking these questions, because obviously this committee has a very important job of scrutiny when it comes to the government's budget. And I think when it comes to the sort of size of the civil service and the efficiencies that you're making, there's a bit of a grey area in terms of the scrutiny, because we like to know that the decisions that are being made are designed to improve the outcomes.
Yes.
That's the key thing.
Yes.
Can I just finish on one other thing? I mean, this Parliament has seen a considerable increase in the number of what we call framework bills, which means that obviously the final decision about what the bill will look like is often something that is a way there in the future, and it's not very clear when we're in the scrutiny process. And that, I think, has led to some tensions within the size of public sector workforce. Do you think that there is an issue about the number of framework bills that we have in this Parliament? Should we be trying to reduce them so that we've got better scope for keeping a very firm hand on the scrutiny that we need? Because we have had a lot of framework bills, particularly in the last 3 years, and that's something that has, well, it's gone alongside difficulties in a financial memorandum, because the more framework bills you have, the more difficult it is to look at the sort of detail of a financial memorandum. Do you think that's a worry for the Parliament?
Well, I remember discussing this with you in the committee before, and we've tried to improve our financial memorandum capabilities in the last year, and Jackie may just say a bit more about that if that's okay. But I absolutely understand the point. You know, it's sort of we stepped through some examples. Was it the police bill, obviously social care, and a few others. I can understand the desire to take powers and have flexibility, and on the one hand that enables you to iterate based on evidence and experience in a live environment, knowing you have the competence to affect change. So in a sort of agile way of seeking to affect public service reform, it's empowering, and I've seen it done well before with welfare. But as you say, it creates uncertainty about cost and benefit, and I think having checkpoints and moments to be able to return to Parliament to have that debate matters, but also clearly we still need to try and do the best we can to provide you with scenarios on costs and the best information. But we've been trying to work with our Parliament unit on responding to this challenge. I know the Minister's written, but Jackie, could you say anything else on financial memorandums and the work we've done?
Yeah, absolutely. So I think in terms of the framework bills themselves, I think it's worth noting that we do try and ensure wherever possible that even within for the framework bills that there's robust financial estimates, and where there's uncertainty that there's a range provided, for example, in terms of those financial estimates. And we do engage regularly with the parliamentary legislation units and committee clerks. So we're live to this particular issue, and we are trying to do everything we can to mitigate that. In terms of the financial memorandums, we touched on some of this a little bit earlier. So we did refresh the SPFM, the Scottish Public Finance Manual. It was refreshed last week only, but we've been doing a lot of work in recent times to provide training and guidance. We have regular engagement with the Bills team. So when there's a bill in the pipeline, we are talking to them at a very early stage. We are working with them, as I said earlier, to understand how we can best present the most accurate costs, that we understand how we can quantify risks and where necessary put ranges. And then there's the update of the information, which again we spoke about earlier, and making sure that where there's a significant change, then Parliament is advised of that at the earliest possibility.
Thank you for that. That's helpful. I mean, I think the process of a framework bill is such that the reason for it is to try to engage effectively with stakeholders before you present it in full to Parliament. Therefore, the more stakeholders you have involved, the more you feel that there's credibility within that bill. The problem is that if we get the financial memorandum for a framework bill that's at an early stage, it's almost impossible, as has our experience proven, it's impossible to get the right idea of the costs. That's the difficulty. And what I was just interested to know from the Permanent Secretary is whether that's something that the Parliament should be reviewing as a potential problem when it comes to getting accurate costs.
And I think it's a fair challenge because, there have been some... If I take the Climate Act that passed Parliament unanimously last autumn, it was resetting a set of targets which had previously been legislated for, which were not feasible, and the costs of those were not affordable. Now, in the end, that's been put right, and Parliament looked at the evidence, and I think that Act was well judged, and it has enabled Scotland to get onto a sustainable trajectory now on net zero that is feasible compared to what was previously in place. We need to sort of ensure that the quality of debate is informed by the evidence such that when you legislate, you're confident the country can afford it. And as you said, it will achieve the outcomes that Parliament wants to see. So we'll continue to do all we can to offer ministers the best advice and support Parliament and scrutiny committees in that regard.
Thank you, Convener.
Thank you very much. Michelle, to be followed by Michael.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. And just picking up on a question my colleague Liz asked, it's helpful to hear you articulate that you have ultimate accountability for headcount in the civil service. And I just think it might be an idea if that were cascaded more thoroughly through the estate. I seem to recall not that long ago having a debate in Parliament where some of the political parties, I think probably Lizzie's, was condemning the Scottish Government for headcount, when in reality, given that you have ultimate accountability, that seems an unfair position. So I just think it might be worth cascading that knowledge throughout all of the civil service and indeed all of the political parties as well.
Yeah, happy to meet with colleagues and have that conversation. I think though the point that I was trying to get right, but absolutely, those three accountabilities I have to advise and serve ministers, to be the principal accountable officer and lead the civil service, I think includes being steward of headcounts. But of course, I'm doing it within a budget envelope voted by Parliament that has been tabled by ministers. And so I'm not a sort of unilateral actor. I'm doing it through a dialogue, preferably with an agreed strategy. And I want ministers to be happy that their civil service is serving their interests and their objectives. But of course, there are core functions like paying benefits or ensuring we've got enough mariners to staff our vessels to keep our seas safe. There are some fundamentals that we do to maintain the sort of operational competence of the civil service that need to be done. Yeah.
I can see that there's clearly the potential for tension in terms of the elected role of ministers. So obviously you'll know this yourself, that the civil service total operating costs has routinely been overspent by about 10% in recent years. And if ministers have limited potential for doing something about that, if it's a kind of dialogue type situation and you retain ultimate accountability, that seems to me to be somewhat of a problem.
Well, the total operating cost is mainly a function of headcount and pay, so it's mainly pay bill. Ministers agree the pay deal, and as I say, we agree the control framework for the size of their civil service. So one of the reasons that the top budget has gone up in recent years more than was forecast was that inflationary shock and pay awards being higher than what was forecast. And one of our responses to containing TOC is to reduce the size of the civil service and to reduce our contingent workforce, which actually costs more per unit than the civil servants do. So we've reduced our contingent workforce. I think we're down around 1,000 from what it was. We've more than halved it. More to go there, I think. There's opportunity still. But the dialogue on TOC and workforce with ministers is regular.
Yeah, and dialogue's a fantastic thing, but really what this committee will look at is ultimate accountability, and it sounds like this area is worthy at some point of a future look at to understand the implications of that from ministers that are democratically elected and in post civil servants. I want to carry on just now, and I've got quite a few questions, so please bear with me if I interrupt you, because I know you will, Convener, but yourself, Permanent Secretary. Yep. I wanted to ask you some questions relating to the Scottish Government responsibilities as an employer and potential exposure to costly legal action. Now, it can't have escaped your notice that quite a number now, the list is piling up, public bodies are falling foul of overreach with gender self-identity, despite this not being the law. So just a first quick question, which I think is a yes or no. I'm assuming you have overall responsibility for ensuring that the Scottish Government complies with the law as an employer. Good, thank you. And in terms of the current headcount of the civil service, just it will help me with my kind of figures, what percentage roughly of them are women of the overall headcount?
over 50%.
Okay.
50%.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, that's enough. So obviously, as we know, women have got specific considerations, whether it's pregnancy, maternity leave, menopause, and so on. So within the civil service, what groups are there in place to represent women's voices in particular?
So we have a number of staff networks, including staff networks to represent gender interests, women's interests in that regard, and we'll make sure that we're listening to feedback. And Leslie's got the various diversity data in terms of the breakdown of our workforce. We have a diversity and inclusion strategy, and as you say, we make sure we've taken steps, of course, to assure ourselves under the Equality Act and workplace regulations that we are providing all the right flexibility and support that we should. Yeah. It does also come down to culture and making sure
I'm going to come on with that. In terms of the voices, the groups you've mentioned, can I assume then that one of them that you've referenced there is the Women's Development Network?
Yep.
Okay, yes, there's a Women's Development Network and a minority ethnic women's group as well.
Okay,
yeah.
And I mean, is it in the public domain that the Women's Development Network allows for men to self-identify as women?
I'm not sure.
That probably brings us to our trans and non-binary policy, which is there to really enable that all of our colleagues can operate in a way that gives us we hope, an inclusive and welcoming culture. And that includes recognising those colleagues who identify as trans, for example.
Okay. So, I mean, again, I suspect we'll probably go on to that, but I just wanted to be clear. There was a Freedom of Information released on 31st of January 2025 that notes, and I quote, "The Women's Development Network aims to create a supportive platform and level playing field for women and those who identify as women." So, self-ID. Okay, are there other areas that the Scottish Civil Servants is allowing self-ID in, despite this not being legal?
Well, it's difficult, I guess, to discuss this in a hypothetical way.
No, I've got it in an actuality. So perhaps if you can't think of any, I could help you. Might you be forgetting about changing rooms and toilets? And again, you referenced it yourself, Leslie, the trans and non-binary equality and inclusion policy, most recently reissued in 2023, states, and I quote, "Trans staff should choose to use the facilities they feel most comfortable with." In other words, that they self-identify into. So, my question to you then is, given this, do you accept that this means that any facilities that are stated for being for women only in the Scottish Government are therefore in practice mixed sex? For example, changing rooms and toilets.
So my experience of being Perm Sec is, if I take St Andrew's House, we have men's toilets, women's toilets, men's changing rooms, women's changing rooms, lockable, enclosed, single spaces also available. And we try and create an inclusive culture where everybody feels safe at work. And I have not had a single escalated complaint to me in my time where that has been a problem. So if a trans colleague wants to get changed at work, which is quite a rare occurrence for the civil service and the Scottish Government, but if they do wish to, and they self-identify as a woman, then it is possible for them to get changed in an enclosed, lockable, isolated space, and or if they have self-identified, to use changing rooms, which in themselves have lockable enclosed cubicles. We're talking about a tiny minority of colleagues. I've never had a complaint raised with me, and we have tried at all times to assure ourselves that, one, we're lawful, of course, under the Equalities Act and workplace regulation, and secondly, we're creating a culture that is kind and inclusive and safe for people. And I think that we've been working our way through that as carefully as we can. But if there are instances of concern that you want to write to me about, I can look at them and come back to you. But that's been my experience.
Where I'm coming to this is from Restaurant. You yourself have mentioned the Workplace Health, Safety and Welfare Regulations of 1992, and I think you recognise that there's an obligation to meet them over and above of the Equality Act of 2010. Now, you've referenced that these regulations state that there must be separate toilet facilities for men and women, except where each toilet is in a separate room lockable from the inside, and separate changing rooms where needed for reasons of propriety. So, are you completely comfortable, 100%, that you are working within these regulations? And indeed, it might be useful for us to know how many of these facilities there are that meet these regulations relative to the number of women within the civil service. So you're completely certain you're meeting these 1992 regulations, i.e. each toilet in a separate room lockable from the inside.
We have 63 buildings in the Scottish Government estate, owned and leased, and those buildings all contain a range of choice for people, just as the Permanent Secretary has set out, and appropriate, obviously, to the requirements of the workforce there. So we have, headquarters buildings like St Andrew's House, for example, where it's mainly office-based staff who are working, but then we also have facilities for mariners or agricultural teams and so on. So the facilities are always appropriate to the requirements. But we do always take our responsibilities as an employer to ensure that we're meeting the 92 workforce regulations very seriously, and indeed go wherever we possibly can over and above that to offer that range of choice of facilities.
So if the only facilities that provide a reliable alternative to de facto mixed-sex provisions are fairly limited by definition?
No, we generally provide cubicles that are lockable for an individual. So that's.
It's not just about lockable; it's standalone, isn't it? They need to be standalone. And you haven't quite answered my question. That are you 100% sure that you are operating within the 1992 regulations, and that the Scottish Government won't be another public body that will be subject to potentially a costly legal case, in the light of it would appear that many bodies remembered about the 2020 Equality Act but forgot about the 1992 regulations?
It's an area that we keep absolutely under regular review, and we have looked at this issue recently to satisfy ourselves that we've got appropriate provision in place, as I say, with choice wherever possible for our colleagues. So we're satisfied that we're meeting our requirements. Of course, we will always keep a very watchful eye on, the latest legal position and any changes coming through from the courts, for example, and review again in the light of any significant changes there. So that is something that we will do in respect of all of our policies as an employer.
And is that something you're doing just now in terms of further legal advice in the light of the number of cases coming out of public bodies? Are you reassessing your legal advice to make sure that the employment law element of it is absolutely on point? Is that something you're actively doing at the moment?
Well, so you would expect, given the latest debate around NHS 5, the Supreme Court case, the questions you're asking are questions we've asked ourselves to assure ourselves. And, one of the things I wanted to go back and look at is, have we ever had a similar case in the Scottish Government of concern that, we have to learn from? And as I say, I have never had a complaint raised from me in over three and a bit years. But of course, seeking those assurances to be clear that under the Equality Act, under the workplace regulations, under our own policies on inclusion, enclosed, lockable, separate, choice. These are the principles that sit at the heart of our policy, and trying to create a safe and respectful environment where everybody feels safe at work. And where, if a concern is raised, we respond to it in a person-centred way, listen carefully and understand the issue and respond accordingly. But this is clearly a very sensitive debate. There are 2 legal cases currently live, so as Leslie said, of course, we will await any legal judgment, and if we have to make some adjustment to our operating practice, we'll do so. Our current view, assured again, is that we're doing everything as we should do, lawful within the various duties, that, including workplace regulation, but we'll continue to be vigilant to that.
I've just got a couple of quick questions. One, we mentioned the trans inclusion policy earlier. I wanted to just note that the EQIA on that seemed to be heavily skewed towards LGBTI groups, in that, of course, the EQIA itself states that it's relevant to 4 other protected characteristics: disability, age, sex and religion, oblique belief. But none of those groups were represented in the process of developing that EQIA. 6 out of 10 places in the steering group, other than the lead official, were set aside for staff representing LGBTI interests. Is that weighting how you normally try and meet the public sector equality duty?
No, I mean, I think the diversity inclusion team and the strategy and the way in which we work, by definition, seeks to be inclusive of everyone. We've got a lot of
why would it exclude then representation from those 4 other protected characteristics?
Unless you've got any more detail on that, we'd have to...
It would be useful to understand the relative weighting of the development of a multitude, in fact, of EQIAs, how you assess that all protected characteristics are recognised. Just a final question on a completely different area, before the convener interrupts me. There was quite a spat between yourself and the Information Commissioner over FOI 193/2024, which of course was to do with the Hamilton review. I just wanted to assure myself whether there were any other lingering issues that might bite Joe Griffin in the future. And therefore my question to you, in the light of all the outstanding FOIs, would the Information Commissioner describe himself as content with the status of all FOIs before you move on, if he were here at the moment?
I'm not sure exactly what the Commissioner would say, but I meet the Commissioner regularly. We've worked really hard to improve FOI and transparency and record management. It's one of those core competencies like workforce management. We regularly now respond to our FOIs 95% plus within 20 days. I've met the Commissioner, of course, to discuss the historic Hamilton review. His predecessor came into the Scottish Government and went through that report line by line, including the redactions, and then published his own report to assure himself that all had been done in the right and proper way.
I just wanted to check before you move on and before Joe Griffin comes in, that for his sake there aren't any stink bombs awaiting him in terms of outstanding actions from the Information Commissioner.
No, not in terms of the Hamilton review. FOI often presents bumps in the road, but that's the point of transparency. And we do everything we can to fulfil all our duties with that regard. I think, if I recall, my PPS will nudge me if I'm wrong, and Joe, I and the Commissioner will sit down and go through a handover together before we move on. And look,
that's useful to know.
This is important, and we want to get the transparency and the trust right.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Michael, to be followed by Craig.
Thank you, Convener. Thanks for your evidence so far, Permanent Secretary. You started today by saying that the track record of the Government for for balancing budgets is good. So what about the last 3 years of emergency budgets leads you to that conclusion?
Well, so forgive me, when I said good, I was talking about the overall budget and the fact that we've balanced it. And, you know, I was honest with PAC a couple of weeks ago that that's been difficult. So in the first year, we came out of the pandemic. There was a big reduction in COVID consequentials. Pay deals were above forecasts. And we did balance the budget, but it was very tight. The same was true the following year. Again, by that point, double-digit inflation. It was looking very tight this year, but then, as you know, post-UK general election, a significant shift in public investments strategy from the Chancellor led to in-year consequentials being higher than we assumed they would be. So we're on a good track now, no ScotWind drawdown. But the emergency budget process, again, back to transparency, where we have had to take in-year intervention to reduce expenditure against the voted authority from the budget, ministers have received advice and then set out openly where we've had to do that. And that has led to us, for example, prioritising money for Ukraine resettlement that we previously didn't think we would have needed to in 2022, or prioritising additional resources for pay deals to bring industrial action to an end, particularly in 23-24 when inflation was higher than forecast. Overall, I think the discipline on balancing the budget is good, but I do agree with you that the emergency budget interventions in the year are disruptive, and we prefer not to have to do them.
So it's a bit of a stretch, really. Three consecutive years of very significant interventions at the midpoint to have to rebalance the budget. But let's talk about the most recent one and public sector pay policy. So it was it your advice to the government to set that policy at 3%?
So we've just published pay policy for 3 years, 9%, 333, I think, if I recall. So we've set that envelope. But yes, 3% was seen as aligned with inflation or slightly above, and therefore a realistic objective to try and bring...
So that's for 25-26 in the subsequent years. For 24-25, you said that there should be a policy of 3% at that year as well. That was completely out of line with the rest of the pay awards that were going on in the public sector at the time, wasn't it?
I'd have to go back and check, forgive me, for Budget 24 what the exact assumption was. But
so I can tell you that it was the public...
3?
No.
Yeah.
Is that correct?
Yeah.
Mr McAllister, yeah? Yes, it is. So it's 3%. And that public pay policy wasn't published. It wasn't provided to the Scottish Fiscal Commission. Was that your advice to the government as well, not to provide the Scottish Fiscal Commission with the public pay policy?
I'd have to go and check to what extent it wasn't specific advice from me as an individual. If we're talking about 2024, so the year of the UK election, and I suspect part of the challenge was around uncertainty. But as you know, the pay review body recommendations came in that summer much higher than we had expected. But also, you know, the previous UK government was very determined to keep public sector pay, and at the time there was industrial action across the UK.
But at that point, the OBR was projecting a far higher figure than 3%. The Scottish Fiscal Commission projected 4.5% because the Scottish Government refused to provide them with public pay policy. After this committee pressurising the government to do so, eventually the public pay policy was published in May of last year, and that showed that there was a 3% assumption.
Yeah.
I mean, that 3% was completely unrealistic, wasn't it?
Well, in hindsight, it was. You're right. It was optimistic or unrealistic.
Okay. That's useful to have that. On that basis, though, I think there's some evidence since that going beyond it being unrealistic, it was known to be unrealistic at the time, in reality, because the external environment made that clear. But also we've had evidence, for instance, from one of the Cabinet Secretaries at the Net Zero Committee on the 14th of January talking about the conversations in Cabinet about the challenges around public sector pay and that those being recognised. Why would you, as the Chief Financial Officer for the Scottish Government, believe that a public pay policy of 3% at that time, that accounts for the bandwidth of over 50% of the entirety of the £60-odd billion budget? Why would you think that that was a reasonable assumption at that point?
Well, if I go back to the spring of 24, you know, across the UK, a lot of effort was being put into trying to contain pay awards. And in fact, if I take the last year of the Civil Service Award, is it 2.7, I think? So, you know, that was below 3. So under Rishi Sunak, you know, the determination to get inflation down and to contain public sector pay was the fiscal strategy of the UK government. There was then an election. Pay review bodies came back and around 10 billion of additional pounds was invested into public sector pay awards by the UK government, which of course then triggered consequentials for Scotland that led to us being able to do the pay deals that we all now know about.
So the Scottish Fiscal Commission clearly disagreed with you in terms of all their analysis. So they made an assumption when they provided the guidance to the government around the structure of the budget of 4.5%.
Yeah.
And they did so with the complete refusal of the government to publish or to provide them with a public sector pay policy accounting for 50% of the national budget. I mean, at what point do you think there should be a dialogue, shouldn't there, between the Scottish Fiscal Commission and the government on that specific point? That's why you are meant to provide the documents.
Yeah. And we
so
have now...
You admit that that's an error. It shouldn't have happened.
Well, we have now published 3-year pay policy. And I think, if I recall, last May we did the same. We tried to set out a long-term trajectory on public sector pay. But in the context of a UK election and high inflation, you know, our pay policy was to try and contain pay awards because, as you say, the exposure of a bigger public sector and higher pay bill is creating sustainability risks.
I suppose what this points to, I'm trying to get to the overall approach that you've taken to the budget in combination with the Cabinet and the First Minister, is that it feels like a paper exercise where over the last 3 years you set a budget with some actually known false assumptions within it, wait till the middle of the year and hope that something comes along to bail you out. Would that be a fair characterisation?
I don't think so, no.
No, because I mean, it's essentially, I think, what the work of the Fiscal Commission is pointing to as well around sustainability. Okay, I'll leave that area there. Can I ask about higher education? Where in your risk register does the exposure of the higher education or university sector to international volatility sit?
So we have a corporate risk register that our audit committee look at quarterly, and Audit Scotland attend that. And we have a risk generally around sustainability of systems. That can be higher education, could also be transport or health. The specific risk with regards to education then sits with the Cabinet Secretary for Education and the Accountable Officer, and they have a risk register in their portfolio, which will include sustainability of higher education institutions, of which there's a set of factors, as you say, global factors, inflation, migration factors, etc. Yeah.
So would you say the risk is high?
Yeah.
Yeah. And has it increased in recent years?
Yeah.
Okay. What's your advice to ministers that they should do about that?
Well, there is obviously a specific context to this with regards to the University of Dundee. Ministers have...
I'll come to Dundee in a minute, but I think about the sector-wide issue.
Well, the Scottish Fiscal Commission ultimately seeks to provide the stewardship of that system. What we can see is a number of institutions who are balancing their budget.
The Scottish Funding Council, rather than
yes,
the Fiscal Commission.
Sorry,
okay.
yes, Scottish Funding Council, another SFC.
Yes.
Sorry, the Scottish Funding Council provide the stewardship of that system. comes back to your point around the hard choices within the budget, pay, higher education, social security. We have been trying to do the best we could with the envelope available to ensure the funding for the SFC has been there. But we absolutely recognise Dundee is the most intense example of this challenge. As you say, a set of global factors are challenging higher education. But at the same time, we have a set of institutions who do have balanced budgets. So it is about ensuring, coming back to this point around public service reform, that the right choices are being made.
So if it's a high risk scenario, and you recognise the risk has increased in recent years and that volatility, I mean, do you think that the current funding posture, you talk about the quantum, but there's lots of other factors that could be about the way that the sector is organised, the different business model that's imposed by the Scottish Government. Is it sustainable in its current form, and is the risk proportionate?
I think it depends on which institution you're talking about.
So I'm talking about the sector.
But that's my point. I think there are institutions within that sector who have balanced budgets and are sustainable and are world-class institutions. I think there are some institutions who have been hit by those global shocks, as you say, in terms of international students, inflation, other factors, and their exposure has been higher with lower reserves, and they're at risk.
Yeah.
So I think your point, and let's be honest, this is true across a lot of systems, whether we talk about councils, health boards or higher education, the impact of these shocks, including on the Scottish Government's budget, is creating pressure.
Yeah. Is there ongoing discussions about the sector-wide issue?
Yes,
okay.
There is.
And on the specifics then to Dundee, and I've come to it because there's a separate set of circumstances there, the sector-wide issues and then the grotesque incompetence of management on top of that. I'm interested in what you think the options are for government intervention. Have you given advice to ministers about their legal options and what they can and can't do to intervene? And
yes.
Could you set a little bit out of what those options are?
So I was going to just... No, of course. So I think, if I'm getting this right, forgive me, I think it's tomorrow that the University Scotland and the SFC are giving evidence to Parliament. So this will be an important opportunity for scrutiny on their financial recovery plan and what they intend to do. Of course, we've given advice to ministers in terms of SFC, in-year support to the SFC in terms of liquidity, finance and support it can provide to Dundee. And ministers, of course, want to see that recovery plan put in place in a way that will secure the future of the university, protect jobs, protect students, and see the university get back on a good track. But you're right, there are a set of legal constraints about what they can do. And of course, we provide advice to make sure that they always operate in a proper and regular way. So
could you illustrate a little of what those are for us, please? Those legal constraints. So you've talked about liquidity financing. That's obviously come within the limit of what you think is possible. What is the limit to how far can ministers go? Because at the moment in my home city, it's potentially catastrophic in terms of if this institution goes under, which is still, I think, a very live risk. And locally, people do not feel that the response of the Scottish Government has been proportionate to the size of that risk, if I can put it mildly. So what are the options that ministers have to act?
So look, first of all, ministers will agree with your description of the importance of Dundee University to Dundee and the importance of getting this right. I've mentioned the point around liquidity and the role of the SFC and in terms of emergency sectoral funding. It comes back a bit to your point around the budget and then responding to events. We need to make sure as accountable officers the ministers proceed in a way that is proper, regular, affordable and value for money. So there's a set of constraints there. and that what they are going to consider is lawful. There is a lot of intense engagement going on, of course, as you would expect, with the SFC. I think you'll hear more tomorrow. The university ultimately needs to put in place a long-term recovery plan, and I'm confident that ministers working with the SFC will be doing everything they can to ensure that Dundee University
I don't feel particularly
future.
enlightened, I'm afraid, Permanent Secretary, in terms of what the options that are available are. I think people locally are asking why the government can't take a more significant intervention. I think you've given an answer there that's about the constraint on public finances and the options that are there. I'm particularly interested on the legal restrictions in terms of what ministers can and cannot do to act within this independent institution to give it support.
Well, I think it's making sure that they're acting consistent with the propriety and the structure around the SFC and the sector. So direct intervention from the government does have a set of legal constraints. And we've had this conversation before around things like direct award of ferries or subsidy control and ONS classification. So there are various factors that need to be taken into account. But I can assure you that the First Minister, the Cabinet Secretary are totally focused on understanding all the options available to them and working very closely with the SFC.
Okay. On my last area, if that's okay, Convener. So on a separate, but you made mention of it, the Ferguson Marine issue. Did you advise ministers that a direct award of the small vessel replacement programme to a Scottish yard would not be legal?
Yes.
Yes, okay. Were you aware that the Ferguson Marine Yard business plan that was provided to ministers last June, a nationalised yard, included a direct award in their business plan ahead of 2029?
So obviously for the yard, a direct award would have been a preferred option. And we looked at that carefully. The yard has a number of opportunities in terms of its future development and commercial opportunity, and Gregor may say a bit more. I was there a couple of weeks ago. The business plan is being developed, and, for example, the commercial arrangement they've got with BAE is progressing well, okay. And there are other opportunities.
Sorry, just for a matter of time, this relates to the business plan that was presented last year and was agreed, as reported this morning, agreed by the Deputy First Minister, Kate Forbes, stating that there would be a direct award. They were planning for a direct award ahead of 2029 of that contract, and that was critical to their business plan. Were you aware that that was approved by the government?
Do you want to say a bit more, Gregor?
So I think we need to look specifically at that question. There was certainly quite a lot of discussion between officials and yard management at that time about what assumptions would be appropriate to make regarding direct awards. The view of the Deputy First Minister, supported by officials, was that any direct awards that would have carried substantial risks and uncertainties, and that would not have been in the interests either of the yard itself or indeed for island communities who require to be served by those vessels.
Thank you for that, but it sounded like there was clarity and certainty in the Permanent Secretary's answer. He said that the advice to ministers with a direct award would not be legal. When was that advice provided?
Well, I'd have to get you precise dates.
Okay. Do you think it was prior to June last year?
I genuinely cannot recall the precise dates from last year, but we looked at direct award, subsidy control, and the CMO test, and we were of the view that if it was attempted, it would be subject to legal challenge, and the likelihood would be that that challenge would be successful.
Okay. So, Mr. Arling?
So that was a period of active consideration of what the options were around about June, but we would need to come back with specific dates. But that vulnerability to legal challenge is one of the key issues around the uncertainty that would be created both for the yards if it was subject to legal challenge, and then also for island communities if the whole process
So you
was
understand
delayed.
where I'm going with this, where there's a nationalised yard being under the control of ministers, producing a business plan that says they will have a direct award, and the civil service telling the government at the same time that a direct award would be illegal. And both of these things have been agreed simultaneously by the government. I mean, this is the business plan that stands at the moment.
Yeah, so the yard could bid for SVRP, and the yard did and made it through that first round, as you know. So absolutely, part of the yard strategy has been to bid for SVRP, for BAE work, for other small vessels work, and that's a legitimate aim for them. And I'm sorry, because I appreciate that the news this week for the yard will be disappointing, and it is frustrating that they have not won the work. But similarly, over the last few years, the challenge has been to learn the lessons of the past and to ensure that open commercial procurement is done accordingly. And that's what has happened. SVRP has been awarded following a very robust and proper process. There will be another stage to this programme in the future, I expect, in terms of SVRP 2, and I hope the yard will have a good chance of bidding for that work in a commercial environment.
Thank you, Kabir.
Thank you. Craig, followed by Joan.
Mr Marks, public sector reform. Just a few brief questions in relation to integrity, propriety, transparency and impartiality of the civil service. Obviously, in March 2024, the First Minister announced the review of the Scottish Government's use of mobile messaging and other non-corporate devices. In your experience as the Cabinet Secretary, have you seen anything that has given you cause for concern about the culture and the application of communications, particularly digital communications, and the government decision-making process that's flowed from that?
Leslie may just say a bit more about the latest, but my view is that government business should be done on government devices because that means it's secure, retrievable, available for FOI, and that's best practice. And that is what we have increasingly established. Clearly, the COVID inquiry has looked at WhatsApp messaging, and we stepped through a process of capturing and sharing tens of thousands of messages with the inquiry, and we've published a lot of those now as well for transparency, and if that information exists, it's retained, it's therefore FOIable. We undertook the Martins Review, we've accepted the recommendations, we're implementing that, and I don't know, Leslie, if you want to say a bit more, but yeah.
So this really fits within a much broader set of work that we've been undertaking since March 21, really to improve our record keeping and including in areas like decision making, for example. So we've put in place new arrangements to ensure that all of our decisions, for example, from ministers, are being separately captured so that we can double check against the record that we have everything there. The Martins Review, I think, has been really helpful for us. We will be moving to end the use of mobile messaging applications for the vast majority of our business in the course of the next couple of months. And work is underway with ministerial private offices, with our colleagues across the organisation in many, many different roles, just to understand what we need to ensure is in place for them to be able to use, as the Permanent Secretary says, government devices, government systems.
Okay, and Mr Marks, had you been asked by the former First Minister Nicola Sturgeon whether she should have retained or deleted her WhatsApp messages, what advice would you have given her? Had you been consulted?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question for me?
Had Nicola Sturgeon consulted you over whether or not she should retain or delete her COVID-related WhatsApp messages, what would your advice have been to her?
Well, yeah, so she didn't ask me that question, but clearly, given the requests from the inquiry, all messages that might be relevant should be retained, and that is why we've shared over 20,000, I think, WhatsApp messages, and we collected all those together through 2023 and shared them with the inquiry.
In relation to impartiality, the Ministerial Code states that ministers must not use public resources for party political purposes. At any stage in your tenureship, did you have concerns that the civil service may have been being brought into the political sphere in such a way?
There have been times when I've offered advice to ministers to protect that principle and to prevent the risk of a breach of the Ministerial Code. Speeches that might include political content, we must make sure we redact them carefully and don't broadcast them as the Scottish Government, and we've worked hard on that. So you're right, it's an important principle, and where there's ever been an issue or a concern, I have provided advice. I made reference earlier to the pre-election period in the summer of 24, where I gave advice to ministers to say they could not proceed with a set of publications and events during an election period.
Okay, I raised with you one particular example where I think it probably was safe to say that ministers might have been pushing the boundaries, which related to a tweet in October 2022, where it was said that the Scotland's economy would, quote, grow faster with independence. And that tweet is still on the Scottish Government's website. Did you get the impression that there were grey areas at some points and you felt like the civil service was being pulled over the line by ministers?
So we've tried to work hard on communications to make sure that they are informed by analysis and people can link from that type of message back to, for example, a publication where the government has sought to set out the evidence. So I think, if I recall, but October 22, there was a set of publications that looked at the comparable economic growth rates of countries like Ireland and Denmark and other nations of similar size, and their historic growth rates were better than Scotland's has been. And the point that was being made in that tweet is if Scotland's growth rate could match similar sized nations, it would be higher and could grow faster. I appreciate your point that you need to be careful on the boundary.
Fine. Just to switch over to public service reform, you told the Public Audit Committee that £280 million is projected to have been saved in the 2 financial years up to March 31st.
Yeah.
That's £280 million of a £115 billion budget over 2 years. That amounts to 0.25% in savings. Do you think that's ambitious enough?
There's more to do. Those programmes we've sought to show cashable benefits, cost avoiding savings, and publish them. The point I was making to the PAC is we need to do more of that at a bigger scale to give Parliament, ministers, the public confidence around fiscal sustainability. Obviously, a lot of public bodies have been taking choices in recent years to live within reduced budgets. We've just talked about the higher education sector, local government reform. I take Visit Scotland, Scottish Enterprise, some of the bodies that Gregor sponsors. We've seen significant savings on top of what you're quoting there. But one of the things the PSR programme needs to do is draw it all together more and tell that single story, milestones and benefits. And that's the plan for the publication in the spring.
But it does still appear like a drop in the ocean. I think you've also said in the submission that the target is to save £300 million over the next 2 years.
Just from these programmes?
Yeah, but that's actually 0.23% again. So we're still talking about relatively small sums in relation to a very, very large budget.
So we've taken a set of programmes that Leslie's team lead, procurement, commercials, estate, digital and automations within core SG. And as you say, the 280, 270 plus the 300, that is, over £500 million of savings over what is sort of a 4 or 5 year period. That's material, but it is only 5, 6 programmes worth of effort. there is a whole plethora of other activity going on, like summary case management, like reducing admissions and attendances into the health system, like reducing headcount across various systems. On top of that, what the PSR programme have got to do more of is bringing it all together to tell the story, because I take your point, we need to show all the activity where we can, how it's reducing costs to deliver better outcomes.
And you've talked about the unit cost of the contingent workforce versus the full-time workforce. Obviously, the data that you've released shows that the headcount in the contingent workforce has fallen from 989 to 668 between March 2022 and September 2024. Yet, in a written answer that I received, we also discovered that the number of senior civil servants in Scotland has increased by 500 over the same period. Presumably, those senior civil servants, you've got less flexibility around their contractual terms. You have a policy of no compulsory redundancy, and presumably they attract significant pension benefits as well. So it does seem that you're losing contingent workforce through the back door, but you're recruiting or promoting more mandarins within the mainstream civil service. Is that not a fair way to characterise this?
Well, I describe the fact that the civil service in Scotland over the last 5-10 years has got bigger under devolution. Smith Commission, new powers, social security, a whole bunch of additional deliverables, ScotRail, etc. We do ultimately want to reduce the size of the senior civil service as well, as part of that strategy of reducing the core civil service in the Scottish Government. And the point around the contingent workforce is we're spending a lot of money on contingent workforce when core capabilities such as digital enables us to drive out efficiencies as well. But I take your challenge. The importance of attention to detail across all grades to reduce TOC is the determination Mr McKee has, which we're working with him on. And I expect you'll see it come down year on year in the future as well.
There is a reservation that the Institute for Government identified in the UK civil service, which I think applies here in Scotland, which they described as uncontrolled grade inflation. In other words, middle grade staff are being promoted more rapidly than ever before. And the Institute effectively feared that this may be just a simple way of circumnavigating pay restrictions and pay restraint during a certain period in the civil service. Is that happening? Are civil servants being promoted in order to effectively raise their salaries?
No, it's not what's happening, but I do agree that as you move away from, and you're able to increasingly automate manual tasks and upskill the civil service, we have absolutely seen the complexity of what the civil service does in Scotland increase, and we've recruited accordingly. So it is true that we have more senior civil servants today than we did 10 years ago or 5 years ago. But it is not a policy to try and do that to counter the pay policy. It is a deliberate workforce strategy to ensure the capability of the civil service can deliver for the government.
The Scottish Government has made virtue of there being no strikes within the Scottish public sector, which they effectively said was a kind of red line for them, but that turned out to be a green light for the unions. So has that hampered public pay negotiations in Scotland?
Well, so ministers are committed to collective bargaining, and I think we all recognise the disruptive impact of sustained industrial action on communities and public services in our economy. And ministers have quite reasonably always tasked us to do whatever we can to negotiate to bring industrial action to an end. But as you say, we have had industrial action recently in Perthshire with regards our teaching workforce, in 22 with regards local governments and various other isolated incidences. And, you know, we do have a bigger public sector in Scotland with a higher pay bill. Earnings are higher as a result. And that commitment to collective bargaining is a fundamental part of this government's employee relations strategy. And I think we certainly, for example, did not lose strike days in our NHS in a way the previous UK government did. and ministers were keen to protect that because
So that
of
probably
the
has come with consequences, because it was seen as a bit of a whip hand for the unions, was it not?
Well, the point of collective bargaining is to seek to get to a fair and affordable pay award that that values the workforce and gets the retention and recruitment of capability necessary to run public services. But I agree with you. Pay bill, size of public sector and cost is an exposure, particularly relative to the rest of the UK, given our block grants, that must be covered in the budget. And it's a pressure.
Just one final question on me, which is probably more relevant today than it would have been otherwise, which is you said to the Public Audit Committee that the difference in relation to the block grant, specifically in relation to welfare spending, which is about 1.5 billion there or thereabouts, is material but manageable if the UK government go in a slightly different direction in relation to welfare and how you qualify for that. I mean, personally, I actually think it probably is material and possibly unmanageable presently, but isn't there a significant risk now in the Scottish Government's budget because of where we are presently and where we may end up if the UK government cut back on welfare spending?
Yeah, so it's another example of that difference of relative UK, an adjustment in the block grant and then an exposure long term. So I agree it's a risk. So, total additional investment in social security, 25-26 of 1.2 billion, that rises to 1.5 billion in 29-30. So that was the 300 odd growth in the additional investment in social security that I was making reference to at the PAC, which is sizable, but I would argue manageable for the government to plan for. But clearly this week, we await announcements from the UK with regards disability reform, and it is possible that that gap will increase further, and therefore the debate, whether it's on higher education or social security, for Scotland to have is relative to the rest of the UK. Can Scotland continue with that difference? And if so, what choices will be necessary? Or should they replicate what the rest of the UK are doing to reduce the delta?
So you would say it's a very clear risk. The government shouldn't be, they should be alert to that risk.
They need to be alert to the risk. It's ultimately an allocative choice. Ministers see these numbers. Ministers know the choices they're making. It's a deliberate choice to continue with a universal winter fuel payment, to remove the two-child limits, and the next question will be around disability. But every time we differentiate relative to the rest of the UK, whether it be on social security, social contracts, or on pay, it is a cost that must be covered by the Scottish Government budget that is not covered by the block grant.
Okay, thank you very much indeed.
John.
Thanks, Convener. Okay, this is quite a long session already, so I'll not try and drag it on too much longer. But we've mentioned public sector reform, and I think there's talk at a UK level of public sector reform as well and impacting the civil service. Would that have a knock-on effect in Scotland?
I think so. Ultimately we are a UK civil service, but of course we serve the government of the day in Scotland. So ministers retain and we retain flexibility in terms of the Scottish Government. But I think, excuse me, in terms of things like hybrid practice, size of civil service, performance management, percentage of digital workforce, AI adoption. Leslie, for example, is a member of the Chief Operating Officer Network for the whole of the UK. I attend, the Permanent Secretary Leadership meeting, and we try and make sure we're learning from each other, sharing best practice. And I think that over the next 5 years, we will see the civil service change across the UK, and I'm sure the same will be true in Scotland.
So if they went in a certain direction, by, for example, reducing numbers, that would increase the pressure for us to reduce numbers?
Yeah, I think it's. I think that's right. I think there would be questions to answer. If I'm really honest, if we said we're going to go up 5,000 whilst the rest of the UK got smaller, the scrutiny would build. Just to be clear, we're not going to do that. But it's happening. It's happening for a reason, and the Prime Minister has set out his expectations around performance, agility, AI adoption, and a more productive state that delivers better outcomes. It's very similar to what we have been trying to do. We've got smaller. We've built a digital strategy. We've put enablers in place to deliver better outcomes for less costs, but we've done it in a very difficult fiscal environment. And to an extent, the fiscal environment requires transformation and innovation because it is another recessionary moment, and we've got to find the creative leadership to deliver better outcomes for less cost.
Okay, thank you. A national performance framework, can you just update us where we are on that and timescales maybe?
I could write to the committee to give you the precise timetables, but ultimately what we want to be doing with the MPF is ensuring that for each of the national outcomes and indicators, we have got more real-time data covering all the indicators and able to transparently demonstrate short, medium and long-term progress towards them. We obviously published that with our annual accounts already with the performance report. The review has been very helpful. It's clearly a valued artefact of public service delivery in Scotland, but I think there's a recognition that we could improve its consistency, its recognition, and the quality of data that supports its scrutiny.
Mm-hmm. I mean, in the Auditor General's report on the consolidated accounts, there's some key messages, and the final one is in relation to the National Performance Framework. It says revisions progress through 24. It's critical that the agreed national outcomes are supported by measurable indicators.
Yeah.
We cannot continue to be in a position where indicators do not progress beyond development. Is that a fair comment?
Yeah. It needs to be complete and more real time.
Okay. Thank you. Continuing with the consolidated accounts, can you just explain, or maybe one of your colleagues, why certain things are included in the consolidated accounts and certain parts of the public sector are not included?
CFO, could you?
Yeah, so this is set out in legislation, essentially, in the Public Finance Act, and the accounting boundaries are driven by that. So there will be bodies, public bodies, non-ministerial bodies and agencies that are within the Scottish administration, and then there are those that sit out. So it was all driven by the legislation.
I mean, I think from a kind of layperson's point of view, you know, the public sector is the public sector, and some people might expect everything to be in the consolidated accounts. I mean, is that something that's fixed in stone, or is it something we should be looking at?
Well, there's a really clear rationale for it. I mean, what I would point to in terms of overcoming some of that is the public sector reporting, financial reporting pilot that we've taken forward, which pulls together all of the information that's in the consolidated accounts with information that is out with the consolidated accounts but still within the Scottish administration, and then with information that's then within the Scottish budget. So it's giving you a complete picture, if you like, of the expenditure and the assets and the liabilities for the Scottish budget as a whole. I think that maybe answers the question that you might have.
I suspect it's an ongoing thing, so we'll maybe return to that in future. Going back to the key messages from the Auditor General, number 2 is that Scottish Government continues to respond to emerging financial pressures. The options being applied provide short-term relief, but their one-off nature means they do not address the overall sustainable financial position for the Scottish public sector. Is that fair to say that we have an overall unsustainable financial position for the Scottish public sector?
So I think the Auditor General said that our in-year budgetary management was appropriate, and ultimately, of course, gave us an unqualified opinion. We've taken structural choices, for example, on income tax and other taxes to increase revenue. So that is not a short-term thing, it is structural. But as we've talked through today, whether it be on social security, public sector headcounts, pay bill, higher education, the sort of concurrency of shocks of pandemic, inflation, and fiscal context means there are pressures that require reform. I think the budget is balanced this year and sustainable for 25-26. There's obviously an election to come. So what happens in the next Parliament will ultimately be choices for the next government to make. There are plenty of choices to ensure the public finances remain balanced and on track, but I agree with the Auditor General and with the Scottish Fiscal Commission that the pressures are continually increasing and they're high.
Okay, thank you. In a number of cases, the Scottish Government has intervened in private companies, and again in the report it lists the valuations of some of these. So, for example, Prestwick Airport, if I'm understanding this correctly, the total financial investment has been 55.5 million. The value in the accounts is 21.2 million. Yeah. Can you or one of your colleagues comment
I'll ask Gregor
where that came from?
Yeah, so to come in. So this is to do with the loan, the valuation at this point in time. As you know, we are stepping through a process with the airport, and we're hopeful to return good value to the taxpayer. But Gregor can give you the very latest.
Yes. So the original value of the loan to Prestwick Airport was £43.4 million. We haven't provided any loan funding since 2019. That loan remains repayable in full, and the amount has not been written off. We do show an impairment in the accounts. The estimated recoverable value for the loan in 2023 was £11.6 million, but that was increased in the most recent accounts to £21.2 million, and that reflects the improvement in the financial performance of Prestwick Airports. In the most recent accounts, the operating profit was £3.2 million and the profit before tax £1.5 million. And as the Permanent Secretary has indicated, the business is performing well, and that's one of the reasons why we now have an exercise underway to test the markets and to see if we can move the business back into the private sector.
So there's a valuation carried out every year, or an assessment of whatever every year, and I assume that applies to other interventions as well.
It depends on the nature of the intervention, and perhaps, Jackie, you might want to say something more about that, but also it's absolutely based on the appropriate accounting conventions. But Jackie, perhaps.
Yeah, absolutely. And we are required to revalue the asset on an annual basis under the relevant accounting standard, as are we required to assess the level of provision that we're reflecting on the balance sheet as well. So yes, it would be applicable for other assets also.
Okay, and then so we have Ferguson Marine total financial investment 304 million, value in the consolidated accounts 94.6 million. Similar picture. Lochaber, well, total investment nil, provision 130 million. And the last other one is Burn Island, total financial investment 50 million, value in the accounts nil. So these are all assessed and fixed.
They're of a slightly different nature, and Lochaber in particular is of a different nature. I might try to explain that, and then Jackie can correct me if I get this wrong in any way. But in the case of Lochaber, there's a provision in the accounts. That's not an estimate of the loss from the guarantee. What it is it's based on different possible scenarios. It's undertaken in quite a cautious basis. We rely on independent analysis in order to arrive at an appropriate value for that provision. It assumes, for example, that any recoveries associated with a call on the guarantee, that those are at the low end of the possible spectrum. So the key point to keep in mind is that it's conservative, and that provision was changed between the 22-23 financial year, when it was 135 million. It was reduced to 130 million in the most recent financial accounts.
Okay, there's probably more we could go on that, but I'll leave it at that just now. And my final question was to do with public inquiries. Can you explain how we control the cost of public inquiries?
Yeah, so it's a good question, because there are only so many controls that we have, and ultimately, the point of a public inquiry is that it should have the full authority to investigate, and we work, of course, with the secretariats of those inquiries to try and support them to undertake their work in a full and comprehensive way that gets to the underlying truth and learns the lessons properly. But as you say, they do take time and they have a cost. And so when to move to a public inquiry is given careful consideration. But apart from, I don't have anything more really on the sort of framework for cost control beyond what we would normally do in terms of propriety, affordability, provision in the accounts, that sort of thing. But yeah.
I mean, it appears to... Sorry.
Yes, a matter for the chair. Yeah, go on, Leslie. Yeah.
Yes, I understand it's a matter for the chairs of each public inquiry
Yes.
to control that, and that's what they endeavour to do as part of their day-to-day work.
I mean, it appears that there's less control. I mean, if we take somebody else who's very independent, like the Auditor General,
Yeah.
the Accounts Commission and so on, they would be working within a fixed budget.
Yeah.
And they have to report every year. I mean, they've got a fixed timescale as well. So we seem to have, although they're also independent, the public inquiries, we seem to have less control over them.
That's right.
Is that fair?
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. We're doing our own investigation into that because we feel there are, for example, conflicts of interest in terms of how some of these inquiries are undertaken, with people going into the public media demanding that an inquiry is expanded, which they themselves may have a pecuniary interest, for example.
Yeah.
But just to stick to this, I've just got a couple more questions and then we'll conclude because we are over time. The first one is go back to the AGS, and he said in terms of performance reporting, he said, well, we recognise improvements have been made in the reporting in 23-24. The performance report needs to be more transparent with a golden thread linking all aspects of performance and providing an overall view of progress. Without clear targets against which activity can be measured, it remains difficult to form an overall picture of the performance of the Scottish Government. And he goes on to say, aligning funding to priority is essential for effective decision making. The continuing revisions and development of policy limits the ability to be transparent, provide continuity and report achievement across the key priorities. There's an absence of clearly defined performance measures with measurable targets for all priority areas. So would you agree with that and say that it is absolutely critical that measurable targets are kind of included in terms of how we look at priority areas and how the Scottish Government delivers?
So I think this is, Convener, work we've been trying to improve. So, you know, we developed the performance report for the annual accounts. I think the first version of the PFG in my first year as PermSec started out at 200 plus pages of initiatives. The latest one is around 40, brigaded around 4 priorities. 2 of those have statutory targets attached to them, reporting to Parliament, child poverty and net zero. We've made the point around the MPF and completing the data and making sure it's more real time. And I agree with the Auditor General, then making the golden thread between PFG, funded through the budget, tracked through the dashboard, reported through the accounts, showing progress towards national outcomes is the objective. I think we've made progress towards that. As I say, with prioritisation of the PFG, alignment to the budget, with the dashboard, that's all live, and the performance report. The MPF element has to complete, and for the next version of the annual accounts, we'll continue to keep trying to draw that golden thread so you can see input, activity and outcome.
Excellent, because that's what we are trying to see more and more of. I think that's a real issue. It's been like wrestling a jellyfish, I think, over the years, sometimes trying to scrutinise some of the work that's been undertaken because of the absence of measurable priorities. Now, just lastly for me, the committee sought clarification on how inward secondments are used to draw an additional resource and provide staff with broader experience. Now, the committee went to Estonia, opened their eyes on a number of areas, and one of them was the fact that the public sector interacts quite strongly with the private sector, more than it seems to be here, where the public sector does seem to be more insular. And I realise that there's an issue of supporting academic secondments organised by the UKRI Policy Fellows Scheme, but I'm just wondering if there's more being done in the civil service to kind of involve the private sector in other areas in the work that you do, and indeed the other way around, to see how you can learn from each other?
Well, I agree, it's really important. And so, for example, Gregor, on my right, we recruited from the private sector as our DG Economy, and we were delighted to do so. And Gregor has brought loads of capability to the Scottish Government on investment and corporate finance, and created the strategic assets function. You talk about that close partnership with universities. We absolutely agree. There's huge capabilities. I think about someone like Professor Linda Bald, who's our social policy advisor. She's regularly at our executive team working hard on things like gender budgeting, child poverty delivery plan, and improving our competence. So we want the Scottish Government to draw on all the talents of the nation. There's lots of interaction with the private sector and the academic and voluntary sector going on. And so when we do recruit externally, by exception, we do so as much as possible in an open way so we can draw talent into the organisation.
Okay, the tendons, Stoney, not to so much recruit just from the private sector, but to have people maybe work for 6 months in the civil service and vice versa. So we do a lot of that.
Comments, yeah.
But anyway, it's been a long session. I want to thank you for answering our questions. Are there any further points you want to make, actually, before we wind up?
No, not at all. Just want to thank the team, the committee, wish everyone well. I appreciate your scrutiny and leadership, and I hope that the rest of the year goes well. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, and I want to thank you on your future endeavours. Actually, I've certainly enjoyed the kind of interactions that we have had, and I do think improvements have been made over recent years. So that's something, obviously, that you can, you can hang your hat on, I suppose. Yeah, indeed. Sorry. Okay. Well, I'm going to call this session to an end now, and have a brief 2 or 3 minute break while we exchange witnesses. Thank you. the Organisation for Economic Cooperation and Development in relation to its second review of the Scottish Fiscal Commission, published last week. I welcome to the meeting Sheree Nicholl, Lead Parliaments and Independent Fiscal Institutions, Public Management and Budgeting Division, Directorate for Public Governance, OECD, and I understand you'd like to make a short opening statement. Good morning.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me here today at the committee. Just I guess a little bit of context around why the OECD is here and why the OECD undertook this specific review. So the OECD has a work stream on parliamentary budget oversight and independent fiscal institutions. As part of that, we have a network of OECD institutions like the Scottish Fiscal Commission, and what we do is we meet annually, but also we set standards for these institutions. And the OECD's main standards are the principles for independent fiscal institutions. And one of the things that we've been doing increasingly in recent years is evaluating the performance of institutions vis-à-vis these standards. And in line with best practice, the Scottish Fiscal Commission has it in its legislation to undertake an external independent evaluation every 5 years. And so the OECD was fortunate enough to be appointed the first time round and also the second time round. So this is the second independent external review that we've undertaken. I've been involved with about a dozen of these reviews internationally. So the focus of this first review is largely around looking at how the institution performed relative to standards. But the second review really focused much more on, okay, how has it responded to the recommendations that we set out in the first review? And then what are the sort of upcoming challenges and opportunities that it needs to be aware of? So just briefly, some of the things we found were that it had responded very well to the recommendations that we set out in the first review. In particular, it had expanded the scope of its analysis beyond just looking at sort of forecasting devolved taxes and spending, but also now looking at medium and long-term fiscal sustainability, which we thought was really important and in line with international trends. It had also strengthened its key relations with some stakeholders. It's inevitable when an institution is first established that it takes time for these relationships to be established. These are now going much better. And then thirdly, looking at how it compares internationally, it really is very strong as an institution. It's something Scotland, I think, can be quite proud of in terms of the standing of the institution and its independence. Looking ahead, the main issue that we see is the changing budgetary context. I mean, it was spoken about in the previous evidence session. There are increasing budgetary challenges. There's a sense among stakeholders that we spoke to that there's not sufficient debate going on around these challenges and awareness of these challenges. So our recommendations focused on the role that the Fiscal Commission could play in helping strengthen and empower public and political understanding of these forthcoming budgetary challenges. And so it looked at how the institution could, for example, strengthen its analysis on spending, how it could better communicate its analysis, and how it could strengthen fiscal literacy among both the public and politicians. And then finally, it looked at some institutional aspects, how it could continue to ensure the institution is strong and independent going forward. A key recommendation in that space relates to its independence and the securing multi-year funding to ensure that no government can at will reduce its funding. I think the sense from the OECD is that these recommendations will put the institution in a powerful place to move beyond an institution that supports the fiscal framework in terms of the letter of the law, but towards an institution that really is a guardian for fiscal sustainability in Scotland, and an institution that ensures that public and politicians are aware of the challenges ahead. And the key decisions that need to be taken. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, thank you very much for that opening statement, and I'm sure that the Chair, Graham Roy, will be delighted to be described as a seasoned and effective communicator. I have to say, I'm sure that we all do actually agree with that. I mean, I think it's an excellent report, I have to say. I mean, it's really, really well put together. I mean, there's... one of the things you've said, for example, page 8, you've said is that you know, the SFC positions the institution have an important role in empowering political and public understanding around budget choices at a time when Scotland's fiscal context will become increasingly challenging. Now, obviously, that's quite a sensitive issue in terms of politics. I'm just wondering how you suggest that they can actually do that in a non-partisan kind of way, or an area that's seen to be non-partisan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's something that we see other institutions doing quite effectively. So, for example, in a time of legislation being considered that would have cost implications on the budget, you know, I think it could look at different scenarios for that legislation and look at the scale of budgetary trade-offs that would need to be made under different scenarios. So, you know, in broad terms, talking about spending decisions and like how those compare to other items of the budget. So, say for example, you know, 10 alternative ways in which you know, this spending increase could be allocated. You know, just trying to illustrate the types of trade-offs that are being made as part of the budgetary decisions that are coming through. So it's important that it doesn't advocate for any specific policy, but provides illustrative examples of the types of alternative choices that can be made.
I think what's interesting is that when you, on figure 1, page 12, you've talked about the SFC's many strengths relative to other independent financial institutions across the OECD, and you've talked about, for example, how it rates very highly in terms of independence, analytical focus, communications apparatus. But the one area it seems to fall down on is communications impact. And you've made a comparison, for example, with the Netherlands equivalent to the CPB, where it says they take a holistic approach to communications from day one. They have communications training 1 day a week for 8 to 10 weeks, formulate clear sentences and ways to visualise material more effectively, etc., etc. Very proactive, remarkably open. 6 in-house staff for communications, which is obviously more than SFC have. But, you know, there's an old saying that you can take a horse up to water, you can't make it drink. I mean, it's difficult really to see how the areas that the SFC cover can really, you know, be broadened out to what you might call a wider audience. I mean, stakeholders, I think, are very much aware of the work it does. I think they respect the work it does. But how do you get that into the general population? Because, I mean, that seems to be an area where the Netherlands is doing well, and there's some examples here, as I've just mentioned, about how they're doing that. But how realistic is it that we're able to get beyond, I don't know, 5 or 10% of the Scottish population, if I'm optimistic, knowing the work of the SFC?
Yeah, I think you know, levels of awareness and understanding around public finance are low. But that's not to say there isn't the capability for these to increase, specifically if it becomes relevant for them. And we see that in a range of subject areas, right, where citizens develop an acute awareness around a particular topic in the news, you know, whether it's the astronauts coming back to Earth, you know, today, and the acute awareness that people suddenly have on the impact of space on astronauts and how they need to readjust over the coming months. You know, it's just an example of how something that's quite technical and abstract can become quite salient, right, to people's lives. And then all of a sudden, they become quite knowledgeable around it. And I think the same can happen around public finances, particularly as it becomes more relevant to them. And I think as you see these sort of difficult spending decisions being made, it has to become more relevant for people. And I think that that's where you have to start talking about, you know, how you communicate public finances to improve people's ability to understand them. And so there's some difficulties around communicating public finances. It's big numbers. You know, people just hear big number, big number, big number. There's people don't necessarily understand why it's relevant to them. There's ways in which institutions like the Scottish Fiscal Commission can overcome these challenges. So, you know, drawing on an example from Ireland, when there was debate around pensions and pension changes, there was, you know, an initial report, for example, the Fiscal Advisory Council in Ireland made on the implications of these pension changes in £1 billion, say, for example. And it got relatively little press traction. But then the debate came back to Parliament and the Fiscal Advisory Council reframed its analysis. And instead of talking about the billions of pounds that was going to cost the taxpayer, it said, you know, young people, for example, will have an extra £2,000 tax to pay as a result of these changes. And then this became much more interest to citizens. So you can see, if you can change the communication of public finances from being about big picture issues that are, you know, lack salience for the everyday person to being sort of tangible sums of money that they can understand, that and showing the implications on them personally, then you start to get more traction. So there are ways in which institutions can make public finances more interesting and accessible for the public.
Yeah, I've done that myself by talking about what the UK debt is per person, as opposed to, you know, some 2.3 trillion, whatever, some figure that people just don't really comprehend. I mean, but what's interesting is that people who, I mean, you've said on page 14, even among those identified by SFC's key stakeholders, just 25% rated themselves as having a great deal of understanding of the Scottish budget, so that's disconcerting in itself. One of the things that you've went on to talk about is the fact that members of the Scottish Parliament themselves are not regularly immersed in budget scrutiny, and they don't have a high level of fiscal literacy. And I think that's understandable if you're focused on other areas, but I think it's important that they do. And you've suggested that an induction of new members following Scottish Parliament elections would provide insights into the role of the SFC and overview of key issues relating to fiscal sustainability.
Yeah. So over recent years, I think we've seen budget scrutiny become much broader, but not necessarily deeper. And there's a study that's been undertaken by I think it was SPICE, the Strathclyde University and Glasgow University, which exactly showed this. And so there's a need for budget scrutiny across a range of subject areas to become much more deeper. And I think in particularly with the advent, for example, of the new powers in relation to benefits, it's very important, for example, that the committee that's leading on that matter become very accustomed to the overall fiscal constraints that Scotland is facing, so that they can bear that in mind when they are passing relevant legislation and looking at the budget. When it comes to the induction, I think one of the challenges we've seen in parliaments across the OECD is there tends to be a focus on the plumbing. And so, you know, at what time of year will the budget be laid? How long will you have to scrutinise it? What are the sort of procedures between the subject committees and the finance committee? These sorts of things. Without necessarily ensuring that all the members on the different committees have an understanding of the key concepts that they need to understand. And it's like the equivalent of showing, you know, parliamentarians the brushstrokes without explaining or showing the masterpiece, right? So there's a need not just, I think, to have this focused induction, but also to change the nature of the induction so that it's much less on the plumbing and much more on the sort of broad concepts that need to be understood if you're to be ensuring that Scotland's public finances are on a sustainable path.
Okay, thank you. And just one more question from me before I let colleagues in. I mean, the last Scottish election was probably more of a Dutch auction than any of the others that I've certainly experienced under devolution, with increasingly unfunded promises being made, frankly, right across the board. You've highlighted that in publishing its forecasts, assessments and reports, the Commission must have regard to relevant Scottish Government policy and will not consider what the effective alternative policies would be. and obviously the Commission's not allowed to do that. Would you think it would be more effective if it was able to do that? And I know that's a difficult balancing act, but other independent financial institutions do actually provide that kind of advice. So is that something you think perhaps would be helpful if they were to look at policies and say, look, that's just nonsense, they're not going to be able to afford that?
I think regardless of whether an institution can look at alternative policies, it's important that these independent fiscal institutions, like the Scottish Fiscal Commission, doesn't take a view on whether or not they can, they should be supported or not. But well within their remit, I think they have the capability to look at a policy, to state its impacts in the short, medium term and the long term, and also to look at, what are the sort of trade-offs as a result of having this policy. So for example, say this pensions change. Increasing the pensions age or decreasing the pensions age, that's going to cost Scotland 500 million a year. That's the equivalent of, spending on this, or this. And it just kind of illustrates, what sort of, or these are the sorts of cuts that might have to be made in order to fund this pension increase, given, Scotland has to balance its budget each year. So I think within its remit at the moment, it well has the capability to do that, and it would have, from speaking to different stakeholders, a lot of people would support it doing this work. So I don't believe a change to its legislation is needed in order for it to perform this really important role to improve the discussion around the trade-offs of different budget decisions.
Okay, thank you for that. We'll go out to colleagues around the table. First will be John, to follow by Craig.
Thanks very much, Convener. Yes, kind of following on that line, I just wondered, is there a danger if we expand the SFC's remit too much to include spending, that it kind of loses a bit of focus?
I think that if you look at the Scottish Fiscal Commission vis-à-vis other institutions that are comparable, so, have a forecasting role, but also have other fiscal analysis within its remit. What we see is actually, the Scottish Fiscal Commission, I guess at present, focuses a lot of its resources on the area of its forecasts vis-à-vis international institutions. And I think that's been right for the last kind of 10 years, as this has been a new function, and it's been a new area for Scotland. But as the system matures, I think these sorts of things become more routine, and then you can look at, how can you devote sort of some of those resources maybe to other areas where they would add more value. So I don't believe that it, going into the area of spending would necessarily compromise the existing functions, because I think it's a natural life cycle of these functions that they become more routine over time, and that can help free up resources to look at new areas.
Mm-hmm. And the convener referred to the table on page 12, which was quite interesting, just all the different. Can you clarify, are some of them national and some of them, I detest the term subnational, but we'll use it anyway. Are some of them national and some of them subnational groups?
They're all OECD countries, and the only institution that's not an OECD country there is the Scottish Fiscal Commission.
Right, because some of the countries have two, like I think Portugal, Ireland, Belgium, there's more than one, so I wasn't quite sure what that meant, if one was subnational or no.
No, I think it's around 8 OECD countries, there's two institutions. So one tends to be a fiscal council and one tends to be a parliamentary budget office. And while there can be some, overlap of functions, generally, the Parliamentary Budget Office provides a much more sort of hands-on role with the parliamentary committees and answering queries. And the Fiscal Council would provide a much more formal role in relation to assessing compliance with fiscal rules and these sorts of things. It's a little bit akin to having both the Financial Scrutiny Unit and the Scottish Fiscal Commission in Scotland.
And continuing on the theme of comparisons, you kind of make the point that, you know, in a sense, the room for error in Scotland linked to the UK is kind of greater because other countries have, I think you say 1.4% of GDP is the flexibility that on average they've got, and we've only got 0.6% of GDP. I mean, is that just something we have to live with and cope with, or is that something you would say should be changed?
Sorry, the room for error refers to the which statistic?
I'll have to
Sorry, for
page 21.
Yes, it was page 21, the bit about managing reputational risks associated with the challenge. So I think you were actually going on to say, because it's so tight, that means there's a risk for a greater risk for the SFC. Is that what you were saying?
Yeah. So I think you know, just what we observe in the Scottish fiscal context is that you know, the Scottish government has to essentially balance its budget, and you know, there's relatively little flexibility in terms of the reserve and the borrowing powers, and as a result, you know, what this means is that where there are forecasting errors, you know, they can potentially have, you know, the impact of a government having to cut its budget in certain areas. And I think that's quite risky, right, in terms of the Scottish Fiscal Commission putting in a position where it could be blamed for cuts being made in relation to the government budget because as a result of its errors, right? And I think that it's important that, you know, the constraints of the fiscal framework are explained so that the blame for any, you know, adjustments that need to be made as a result of you know, the forecasts doesn't lie with the Scottish Fiscal Commission.
But as you say, explaining it, and we've touched on that already, to the public and to MSPs even, is quite difficult. And I mean, I think you said last time in the last review, if I remember correctly, that this was one of the most complex fiscal arrangements, the arrangement we have with Westminster. Is that still the case? Is that still?
I think it's a very difficult fiscal framework for the layperson to understand, yes.
Okay.
Relative to other countries.
Yes.
You're immune.
Including some of the MSPs. And just another point, I don't want to step too much on Michelle Thompson's toes, but the diversity of the SFC, I mean, we've raised before the fact it's all male at the moment. But I was interested particularly that you thought maybe we should widen out the backgrounds of people, that it wouldn't just be economists. And I've always kind of thought of it, oh, we have to fill it with economists. But do you think accountants could have a place?
Well, if you look at, for example, the new EU legislation or the EU directive that's just come through for independent fiscal institutions across Europe under the new fiscal governance arrangements, it states that the members of these institutions, the leaders of these institutions, should have either economics or financial or a budgetary management qualification. And, you know, I think it's really for these institutions to decide what's best in their own context. And I think one of the rationales behind our recommendation was that the Fiscal Commission is looking or will be looking to increase its spending analysis. It is doing more work on long-term fiscal sustainability. This touches upon areas like health spending, you know, climate change. I think in that context, you know, it would be sensible to look at a broader range of skill sets beyond economics and also towards, you know, public finance and public financial management, so that it can have the leadership it needs to manage this analysis.
Okay, thanks. Thanks, Convener.
Okay, thank you. Craig, to be followed by Michelle.
Thanks, Convener, and good morning. You say that the SFC and the Scottish Government should revisit their protocol of engagement to strengthen mutual understanding and reinforce adherence to agreed timetables to ensure accountability, and then go on to say that to ensure that accountability, the SFC should also continue to highlight non-compliance with deadlines through public reporting, creating what you call a reputational incentive for timely cooperation. So that's the equivalent of a gold star. Should the SFC not have some powers of sanction more than just perhaps a critical report or press release? So if that's the gold star, what's the equivalent of the naughty step we should be looking for?
Yeah, I mean, you can look at different types of escalation mechanisms that can be put in place. I think that this committee, in fact, plays a really important role in terms of supporting the Fiscal Commission for receiving its documents in time that it needs to receive, right? And so, you know, for example, the Fiscal Commission being able to write to this convener, and for this convener to raise this matter with the Scottish Government could be, you know, an additional step that could be helpful, and that's the sort of steps we see in other countries that are available to these institutions, you know, to escalate these sorts of issues when required. But I think, you know, it's unusual for any one of these mechanisms to be sufficient alone. And what's good is to have, you know, a range of options that are kind of like soft and hard in terms of ensuring that the information that's needed is provided on time.
The convener alluded to the fact that the list of countries there are all national organisations, but obviously we have a devolved government, devolved parliament, and ergo, therefore, we seem to have not a devolved, but in a Scottish-focused institution. Given that many of these issues that we look at are actually, our spending decisions relate to Westminster, there's a far greater interplay between the two. And also perhaps to address some of the concerns that some people have politically about Scottish exceptionalism, would there be an alternative model for this, which would be for the SFC to be part of the OBR? And would that not also address the concern about the proximity to the organisation that's giving the SFC the funding? Because you identify some questions about the implications between independence and the source of funding. Would that not be an alternative model that might make the organisation further removed from the Scottish Government and also be able to look at the whole of the Scottish public finances in relation to Westminster?
It's not something that any of the stakeholders we spoke to raised as something they would like to see as a potential solution. And I know that, of course, those arrangements exist in Wales, where the devolved forecasts are undertaken by the UK OBR. But I think that, you know, really when I'm looking at the situation in Wales vis-à-vis the situation in Scotland, having your own institution brings with it a lot of risks, but also additional strengths in terms of having an institution that has also the Scottish focus and the Scottish understanding and awareness, and the ability to look at the overall Scottish fiscal context in detail, and looking at the extent to which there are specific fiscal challenges ahead and how those could be addressed, and just, you know, even just the proximity to the Parliament, and being able to work with the Financial Scrutiny Unit in recent years and help upskill members in relation to different fiscal challenges. I think, you know, you've seen a lot of benefits from having a locally based institution that probably outweigh the sort of risks in relation to its independence. Actually, overall, even though there are some risks to its independence, it still ranks very highly in terms of its independence vis-à-vis other OECD institutions.
Great, and it's been alluded to, so I won't labour the point, but obviously I think we've identified that the communications apparatus within the organisation is very good. That's the people who are very, very effective communicators, but the impact is considerably lower than the Netherlands, for example, and also the OBR. So what lessons could we take from there that could perhaps the SFC could look at in order to be able to bolster the impact of what I think is a very effective communications operation, which just doesn't seem to be cutting through?
Yeah. I'm really glad you asked that, because I think that's one of the things that we've been talking about with the Scottish Fiscal Commission in depth and trying to understand as part of this review process. And we've really come to, I guess, two conclusions. One is that there's some contextual elements that are out of the Scottish Fiscal Commission's control that mean that it is having a lower communications impact than some of its international peers. And so I think, you know, when we look at, for example, the media landscape in Scotland, there's relatively few specialist journalists now who look at the budget, and the coverage that budgetary issues get in the media institutions that are most read by citizens is relatively low. And when you compare that to, for example, the UK, the situation is much different, where there's a lot more specialist, financial journalists, and where there's seems to be greater coverage of financial issues. So that's one part of the picture. Saying that, there is still scope for the Scottish Fiscal Commission to improve how it communicates its work, so that in those articles where budgetary issues are being discussed, the work of the Scottish Fiscal Commission is brought to the fore. And so we've spoken to them about how they can further embed a communications culture, specifically within their analysts, enable, so that their analysts are able to write in a much more plain language, so they've got better communication tools, visuals, infographics, these sorts of things, but also in terms of its just interaction with journalists and aspects such as that. So there's two important parts, I think, to that communications question.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, and I mean, we've got to put it in perspective as well. It might not be as good as some places like the Netherlands and indeed the OBR, but it's a lot better than Finland and France and Germany, Portugal, Greece, etc., as we can see from the list that you've put on page 12. Okay, Michelle, to be followed by Michael.
Thank you for the report. I enjoyed it immensely, and I'm genuinely pleased that the SFC got such a clean bill of health as well, because from my time here, I've seen the very determined and deliberate attempts they've made, particularly around increasing communication. So I celebrate them for that. In some respects, though, it's almost like they've kind of got the rap for our kind of status quo, some of, or much of which we've touched on at the moment. And I suppose I would note that it's hard to teach somebody something when their job depends on them not understanding it. We even see basic examples in this Parliament where some MSPs don't understand why there's a need for contingency in a fixed budget, and it happens every single year. I suppose, to what extent is your report really a function of the fiscal framework, i.e. the fact that there's a fixed budget, that there's limited resource borrowing powers, the complexity in the fiscal framework, and would you concede that a little bit of sympathy for the SFC rather being in the firing line, and the other actors have got a very clear role to play?
Yeah, it is important to understand that the SFC is one player in a broader ecosystem. Mm-hmm. And even just looking at something like improving, the fiscal literacy of members across the Scottish Parliament, there's a range of actors that have an important role to play there. Whether it's the Financial Scrutiny Unit itself, whether it's the Scottish Fiscal Commission, whether it's think tanks, whether it's the media. But I think ultimately, unless the public have got an understanding of these issues and are putting pressure on the politicians to sort of understand them as well, then you don't necessarily get this ecosystem that's functioning well. So, yeah, you're correct in that the SFC is just one of a range of institutions that has an important role to play in improving political and public understanding of the fiscal challenges ahead.
Yeah. And you make a comment that I myself was going to make about the specialism in media journalism. We've lost the kind of likes of Ian Fraser, and they're very much generalists. And if your commoner, gardener, MSP doesn't understand the fiscal framework, this also extends to journalists. And I think we've all got a role in that, not just the Scottish Fiscal Commission, I think probably even political parties, because it's not in the public interest that there's such a swathe of ignorance. Yeah, I don't really have anything to add. Thanks, Convener. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael.
It's this, around the issues of the independence of the SFC that you've mentioned, and kind of follows on a little bit from what, some of the things that Craig was saying. You mentioned in the report the nature of the SFC's work and the possibility of a changed political landscape means that tensions could emerge. Were this to become a more significant risk to the effectiveness of the SFC at some point in the future, then alternative arrangements should be considered around the funding of the institution. I mean, what is that? Could you say a little bit more about what you see as that changed political landscape and where the tensions might emerge?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so there's been no issues to date with funding of the Scottish Fiscal Commission, and I think it's functioned very well in terms of, them receiving, for the most part, the resources that they need to undertake their role. But what we see in other countries is that, particularly when you get involved with spending analysis, for example, you start to get much more in the political crossfire. And I think that it's important to recognise that there might be increased level of defences that are needed for an institution like the Scottish Fiscal Commission. So I think one aspect relates to the changing nature of its work looking ahead. I think the other aspect is just, recognising that there is, in some countries, this anti-establishment, anti-expert, sentiment, and that politically, some institutions of government have come under fire. And although, it doesn't seem to be that this is a political situation in Scotland right now. It's just recognising that these sorts of situations have arisen elsewhere, and putting in place the protections at home that make sure that the institution is protected if it arises here.
So, circumstances recently, obviously, we had the mini budget. The Prime Minister Liz Truss then questioning the validity of the OBR in terms of their working with them in any way, and that she said that engaging them at all, I think she said, was a mistake. That in actual fact that was part of the problem rather than the policies. That's the kind of circumstance that you're talking about, where people are finding problems with the validity of the organisation on the basis of the choices they want to make.
Yes, that's the sort of circumstance, and we have in other countries seen institutions receive budget cuts when they've produced analysis that the government has not liked. So we've seen that both in Canada and Hungary, for example.
Okay, that's useful to know. A couple of suggestions about SFC receiving funding directly from the Scottish Parliament rather than the Scottish Government. Now, this committee has done quite a bit of work around directly funded organisations, commissioners and so on. And I would imagine, although I don't put words in people's mouths around the table, that might be a concern in terms of, but what other models are there for increasing that independence, do you think?
So what we have in the OECD principles for independent fiscal institutions around resources is that there are kind of two main protections that can be put in place. One is that they have a separate budget line in the budget, and then it becomes increasingly transparent if there's any changes to that. And then the second thing is that they have binding multi-annual funding, so that there is not the latitude for any government to change their funding on an annual basis in response to analysis that isn't favourable to that particular government. So I think those are the two things internationally that we focus on as being the most effective in securing resources that are independent from the government.
So if the committee was to pursue perhaps a budget being set for the Scottish Fiscal Commission at the outset of a parliamentary term, with a plan across those 5 years, you think that would grant some more security around the kind of the variations in the politics within it?
Yeah, that's one way of doing it. I think I would have some hesitancy about linking it to a parliamentary term, because I do think that these, if you look, for example, in the UK model right now, so The UK OBR has also just undergone a review, and it was recommended that the UK OBR also receive multi-annual funding. So how it works in the UK is that the UK OBR, as of last autumn, will now get set funding for the next 3 years, with the third year being decided on a rolling basis. So I think that would be one way in which you could do multi-annual funding that's delinked from the political cycle.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. That's concluded questions. It's just one other question from me, basically. I mean, you, in the conclusion, talked about the SFC's potential go beyond its role as official economic and fiscal forecasts and help raise awareness around fiscal challenges. I mean, they have actually obviously done that in terms of climate change, sustainability, and they haven't really had any political kickback because they have been able to, I think, show a degree of political neutrality on that. So do you? Obviously, you believe that that there should be deepening spending analysis beyond social security to offer more comprehensive insights into public spending trade-offs.
Yeah, that's the thrust of our recommendations. Really, is that I think just broadening and deepening their spending analysis will enable them to have produce analysis that is much more helpful for enriching the budget debate in Scotland in the years ahead. And so at the moment, their spending analysis is relatively limited to areas of social security, for example. And I think that broadening that out to cover all the aspects that will be subject to large spending pressures over forthcoming years, so particularly health, social care, aspects like related to the green transition, all these sorts of things are going to be very important in terms of you having at your fingertips the sort of analysis that will enable you to make better decisions on Scotland's fiscal future.
Okay. Well, thank you very much. Are there any further points you want to make just to wind up the session?
Thank you very much. That's everything.
Well, thank you very much for your time. It's been very helpful. I think we all greatly appreciate the work that's went into this very positive report. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that's the end of a public session. I'm just going to call a short break to allow broadcasting official report and our guest to leave. We're now going to private session, but it's just about Non-Ireland, Michael, so you don't need to stay.